Chapter 293. Songnan province has fallen into the enemy's hands. The letter in his hand fell to the ground. Feng Jixing's face was full of shock. What a fast speed! Luo Lai and Zhang Wei were both shocked. Luo Lai asked, how could it be so fast? General Si Kongfan is the new governor of the province. With him around, how could it fall so quickly? Si Kongfan has been killed. Feng Jixing said indifferently, I don't know where Lingnan found a few divine domain experts from. Things are not looking good. Come, follow me into the palace to meet Her Highness Yin. The empire's turmoil has already begun. In Zetian Palace, there were many officials. Everyone was restless. Many of them were gritting their teeth, but there was nothing they could do. When Feng Jixing stepped into the palace with Zhang Wei and Luo Lai, Lin Muyu and Chu Huaijin also came forward. Chu Huaijin said, General Feng also received the news of Songnan province's fall? Yes, what did Her Highness say? There is no statement yet. Lin Muyu placed her hand on the hilt of her sword and followed Feng Jixing and Chu Huaiying to the throne. She raised her head and saw that Qin Yin was already walking over with an exquisite cloak draped over her shoulders. Her silk skirt trailed behind her as two maids followed behind her respectfully. Brother Yu, has Songnan province really fallen? Qin Yin asked anxiously. Lin Muyu cupped her fists and said, I received the letter not long ago. According to the report from the spies I arranged in Songnan province, the scale of the rebellion in Lingnan is very large. They used more than 300,000 men and horses. Jinan Wang Qin conferred Jiao the title of marshal, Lin Yu and Long Lin as generals. They have already occupied 5 Valley City. At most 5 days, they will reach the capital. Qin Yin had a helpless look on her face. Imperial Father. Imperial Father is still in Tianshu province. Chu Huaijin cupped his fists. His face was full of sadness as he said, Your Highness, please forgive me for overstepping my bounds. I'm afraid His Majesty is already in danger. Impossible. Qin Yin shook her head and said resolutely, Father has brought many experts from the Imperial Guards, and he has also taken 3 experts from the 3rd heaven of the Heaven Realm as guards from Dubhe province. With 100,000 soldiers accompanying him, it's impossible for anything to happen. Chu Huaijin looked up at Qin Yin and said lightly, According to reliable information, Qin Yin has invited Luo Lan, a godly state expert who lives in seclusion on the sacred peak. Luo Lan also has several sanctuary experts under her command. If I'm not wrong, Luo Lan has disguised herself as Qin Yi's personal guard. No matter how many experts Your Majesty has around you, how could they be a match for a divine venerable one? Tears instantly filled her eyes. Qin Yin stood there silently and murmured, Imperial Father will be fine. Imperial Father will be fine. Lin Muyu stepped forward and gently hugged Qin Yin. Now he was Qin Yin's only support. He whispered in Qin Yin's ear, Xiao Yin, the Prince of Jinan has committed treason. Everyone is panicking. You are the only one who can support the overall situation. Be strong. Imperial Father may be fine, but before that, you must guard Lanyan City. Qin Yin quietly wiped away her tears. Lin Muyu took a few steps back, but he still stood among the officials. At this time, Minister Luo Xing cupped his fists and said, Your Highness, the Prince of Jinan, Qin Yi's act of treason is really stupid. As the saying goes, his words are not justified. As long as we send an elite army to Songnan province immediately, they will definitely be easily defeated. Feng Jixing couldn't help but laugh. The 200,000 elite soldiers of Bailing City are a motley crew? This is really a big joke. Lin Yu is one of the 7 divine generals of the present age. He is well versed in the art of war and strategy. Together with Long Lin, who can't be underestimated, if we underestimate our opponents, I'm afraid the history of the empire will really end today. I hope Your Highness will understand. Luo Xing raised his eyebrows and said, General Feng has been leading the imperial army to occupy the imperial capital for many years and hasn't participated in any battles. No wonder he is like a tiger whose claws have been sharpened. Is that so? Feng Jixing sneered. Qin Yin frowned and looked at the crowd and asked, Chu Chu, before Imperial Father left, he asked you to assist Xiao Yin. At this moment, what do you think we should do? Chu Chu's brows were tightly locked as he said, if Luo Lan really came, the Empire would not be able to escape this catastrophe, but we cannot sit still and await death. His Highness personally wrote a letter and sent it to the Seven Seas City and Muyu City to request for reinforcements. It is necessary to let the Seven Seas City and Muyu City's military forces come out in full strength to turn the tide. In addition, in order to prevent any accidents from happening to the letter, send trusted subordinates to these two cities on fast horses. Whether Lan Yen City can be saved or not will depend on how many troops the Seven Seas City and Muyu City send out. Someone, bring a pen and paper. Qin Yin's eyes flickered as she looked at the ministers and said, who is willing to go to Muyun City for me and ask grandfather to send out troops? In the crowd, Yuan Xie's son, Yuan Lien, cupped his fists and said, this general is willing to go. Qin Yin nodded. Then I will have to trouble General Yuan Lien. If you can get reinforcements, I will pardon your father's crime of being defeated and promote him to the position of country protector general. Thank you, Your Highness. Yuan Lien was overjoyed. Qin Yin looked at Tang Xiaoxi who was beside Lin Muyu and said, Shaoxi, Qihai City? Only you are the most suitable person to go, so I will have to trouble you to make this trip. Tang Xiaoxi's eyes turned red and said, let others go. I want to stay in the imperial capital to accompany you and Mu. Qin Yin's voice was full of determination. There is a gap between Duke Lan and Imperial Father. You must go personally. Otherwise, I am worried that Duke Lan will not send troops to reinforce Lanyan City. Shaoxi, I am begging you, you must go on this trip. Tang Xiaoxi silently stood in the same place, her shoulders slightly trembling and said, Xiao Yin, if Lanyan City is really besieged, I will come back even if I can't get reinforcements. Qin Yin nodded gently. Soon, 2 letters were written and sent to Muyu City and Qihai City respectively. Tang Xiaoxi also led the snow pair warhorse and was ready to set off. Lin Muyu accompanied them all the way to the main hall. He had mixed feelings. This time it was not a joke. Lanyan City might really fall. Jinnan Wang had sent out a hierarch expert. Perhaps this would be the last time he saw Tang Xiaoxi. Tang Xiaoxi led the warhorse and looked at him with red eyes and said, Can you hug me again? Lin Muyu was stunned and walked forward. Without hesitation he held Tang Xiaoxi's delicate body in his arms. Tang Xiaoxi trembled all over and tears came out of her eyes. She cried loudly, I'm afraid. I'm so afraid. I'm afraid that I won't see you again after I come back. I'm afraid. Lin Muyu gently stroked her long hair and said softly, Shaoxi, don't be afraid. I promise you that I will wait for you in Lanyan City. Xiao Yin and I will wait here for you to come back and save us. You have to be quick. Tang Xiaoxi nodded her head, Yes, I will. With that she left Lin Muyu's arms. This time, she did not look back. She turned over and mounted the horse, galloping away. In the blink of an eye, she disappeared on the main road. Lin Muyu stood there in a daze. Looking at Tang Xiaoxi who was far away, he felt a sense of loss. A turmoil was right in front of him. How many more things could he lose? When he returned to the main hall, he found that the officials were arguing about whether to send troops or to defend Lanyan City. The minister's office and the Ministry of War argued until their faces were red with anger. Both sides did not give in at all. Moreover, Luo Xing and the Minister of War Lu Fang had many supporters in the imperial court. Dozens of people argued endlessly. It seemed that waiting for them to come up with a conclusion would take at least another 100 years. Feng Jixing, Qin Lei, Chu Huaying, Zhang Wei, and the other generals stood at the side with dark faces and did not speak. As for the senior officials who had made meritorious contributions, such as Chu Chu, Lei Hong, and Qin Hao, the dean of Aries College, they also remained silent, waiting for Qin Yin to come up with a decision. At this time, everyone was faintly uneasy and confused. Be quiet. Qin Yin lightly patted the armrest of the throne and said, Should we take the initiative to attack or defend Lanyan City? Isn't there a conclusion? The Minister of War Lu Fang immediately cupped his fists and said, "Your Highness, this old official thinks that we should defend. The Lingnan army is aggressive and they call themselves the volunteer army. Every time they arrive at a place, they seize the land of the local vassals and use the equal distribution system to divide the land to the local commoners. Therefore, the volunteer army is supported by the commoners. There is even a letter saying that the people of Tsangnan province are already celebrating the volunteer army this morning." Nonsense. Luo Xing sneered and said, "What volunteer army? They are just a motley crew. What is there to be afraid of? We still have 50,000 soldiers in Lanyan City and 40,000 soldiers in Qihai City. Adding the official army in Northridge province, we have more than 100,000 soldiers. I believe we have the power to fight. Moreover, we have Feng Jixing, Qin Lei, Lin Muyu, and other new and fierce generals. In addition, the empire's #1 warrior, Du Hai, is about to be recalled. What volunteer army are we afraid of? You are the one who is talking nonsense." Seeing that the two sides were about to quarrel again, Qin Yin hurriedly coughed and looked at Lin Muyu and Feng Jixing. She asked, "You, General Feng, what do you think?" Feng Jixing cupped his fists and said, "There is Earthstar province to the south of Lanyan City and Songnan province to the east. Let's figure out the situation in these two provinces first. What I want to know is that our spies did not receive any news that the Lingnan army had crossed the Qinling Mountains. How did their army of hundreds of thousands come to the border of Northridge?" In the crowd, the State General Ling Nandan cupped his fists and said, "Your Highness, I know why. My spies in Lingnan have just reported back. The King of Jinan used General Lin Yu's strategy. All the Lingnan army wore green coats and crossed the Qinling Mountains during the rainy season for 7 consecutive days. They called it green cowhide crossing the mountains. It is precisely because of this that we did not notice, and they took advantage of the situation to occupy the Five Valley City." Feng Jixing frowned and said, "Green cowhide crossing the mountains? Damn it," Qin Yin said, "there are about 20,000 troops stationed in Earthstar province. Maybe we can mobilize this army." Lin Muyu cupped her fists and said, "Your Highness, Earthstar province is in the south of the imperial capital and bears the brunt of the attack. If there is no accident, it has already fallen." At this moment, a messenger flew in from outside and said loudly, "Your Highness, urgent report." "Speak." Qin Yin's beautiful eyes were full of worry. The messenger panted and said, "I just received a letter. Lingnan General Lin Yu led 100,000 troops to attack Cold Star City. Earthstar province has fallen." As expected, Feng Jixing felt a chill in his heart and said, "Lingnan is aggressive and this general also thinks that we should defend. Lanyan City has been through thousands of years and has been repeatedly repaired. The city walls are very strong and there is enough food in the city. In addition to the large population, there will not be a shortage of civilian workers. As long as we defend, it should not be a problem to defend for a few months, enough to wait for the reinforcements from Muyu City and Qihai City." Qin Yi nodded, "Then we will defend." Chapter 294. His Highness has announced that all citizens are to enter the city immediately. The city gates will be closed after sunset. Without His Highness's order, the city gates will not be opened until the crisis is over. Zhang Wei stood on the city walls with a long saber in his hand, shouting at the citizens below the city. Lin Muyu, Feng Jixing, and Chu Huaimiao stood at the side, helplessness written all over their faces. As a general of the empire, it's a disgrace to not come out and defend the city. Feng Jixing clenched his fists, his face full of anger. Chu Huaimiao said, "The enemy is strong while we are weak. This can't be helped. I just don't know when Qihai City and Muyu City will be willing to send out their troops. As long as they send out their troops, we will definitely be able to defeat the so-called volunteer army." Feng Jixing looked at Lin Muyu and asked, Do you want to summon your Longdan army camp to Lanyan City as well?" "No need." Lin Muyu shook her head and said, "I have already sent someone to the Longdan army camp to inform them to defend the city like us. Dragon Rocky Mountain is easy to defend but hard to attack. 1,000,000 soldiers won't be able to take it down in a short period of time. Leaving the Longdan army camp on Dragon Rocky Mountain can be used as a surprise attack. If there is a need, the Longdan army camp can also cooperate with us. Feng Jixing clapped his hands and chuckled. That's good. I have seen use Longdan army camp. Their combat power is terrifying, and their equipment is the best in the empire. To be honest, if there are less than 150,000 volunteers surrounding the city, we can open the city gates and fight. Our chances of winning are more than 70%. What if there are more than 200,000? Chu Huaimiao asked with a smile. Feng Jixing's expression darkened. Then we can only defend and not go out. The disparity in military strength is too great. Going out of the city is just suicide. Moreover, the other party has a godly state master and nearly 10 sanctuary masters. Lin Muyu stretched out her hand to sweep away the dust on the battlements, and the place that her palm touched was icy cold. She could not help but feel a chill in her heart as she said, "One do not know how is His Majesty's situation at Fairy Lake. There is actually no news at all. He had brought so many letters with him, could it be that he could not even send one back?" Feng Jixing frowned. "I hope His Majesty can turn misfortune into blessing. But to turn misfortune into fortune, if it was a great misfortune, how could it be resolved?" Late at night, Chu Huaying rode into the darkness of Tongtian Street. Not long after, he stopped in front of the Divine Marquis residence. After he dismounted, he looked at the lonely iron gates and hesitated for a moment before he walked forward and gently knocked. "Who is it?" A guard's voice came from inside. Commander of the Flying Mount Battalion, Chu Huaying greets Miss Xianxia. The guard immediately sneered. "So it's the famous General Chu Huaying. Didn't you say that you would not see my miss anymore?" "Yes, I will not see her. I only hope that Miss can talk to me through the door." Wait a moment." "Thank you." Not long after, Xianxiang's gentle voice came from the other side of the iron gates. "Lord Chu, why are you visiting so late at night?" Chu Huaying cupped his fists and said, "Miss, Songnan Province and Earthstar Province have fallen one after another. Lanyan City is isolated and has lost. Miss Xianxiang is the daughter of the Divine Marquis. Ji Yao and Lin Yu were once Divine Marquis Zheng Yifan's subordinates. I believe they will not make things difficult for you. Miss, please leave the city immediately and look for the Divine Marquis in Tianshu Province." Xianxiang smiled. "Lord Chu, I know what I am doing. Thank you for your concern. I will decide whether to stay or leave." Chu Huaying was anxious. He gritted his teeth and said, "Xianxiang, you must leave now. The Lingnan army will arrive at the city at any time. If you don't leave now, I'm afraid you won't have another chance." "Huaying," Xianxiang called out softly. "Didn't you say that you want to see me in the pugilistic world? If I leave now, we won't be able to see each other anymore. Go, I won't leave. If my husband dies on the battlefield, I'm willing to follow him." Chu Huaying's body trembled. His eyes were bloodshot. "Xianxiang, are you crazy?" There was no more sound from inside the door. Chu Huaying stood outside the door for more than 2 hours. Then he led his horse away. In the early morning of the next day, the 30,000 Imperial Guards and the 17,000 soldiers of the Flying Mount Battalion had all entered Lanyan City and settled in the barracks around the 4 gates, making Lanyan City suddenly lively. However, all the people closed their doors and windows and lived in fear. They didn't know what would be waiting for them in the next moment, whether it would be death or a new life. Early in the morning, there was another heavy fog that shrouded Lanyan City. Wisps of dew slowly flowed down from Lin Muyu's armor. He stood guard on the north wall of Lanyan City. He didn't sleep a wink the whole night and looked rather tired. "You, go and sleep for a while." Feng Jixing frowned. "Look at how haggard you look. If Her Highness saw you like this, I don't know how distressed she would be." Lin Muyu smiled and shook her head. "I can't sleep. Brother Feng, can you sleep?" "I can't." Feng Jixing smiled bitterly and said, "This might be our last battle." "You still haven't received the letter from Fairy Lake?" "No, not even a single one." "Sigh." Lin Muyu sighed. She pulled out the dragon spirit sword and gently wiped the dew on the blade with a white cloth. Brother Feng, are you afraid? Afraid? Feng Jixing smiled. What's there to be afraid of? I'm a soldier of the Empire. It's my honor to die in battle for the Empire. Moreover, heroes emerge in troubled times. Don't you think this is also a chance for us? I don't think so. Lin Muyu shook her head. I am very afraid. I am afraid of losing all the people and things I care about. I am afraid of losing Xiao Yin, Xiao Shi, and all of you. If I can choose, I would rather choose obscurity than to choose glory forged with blood. Perhaps what you said is right. Feng Jixing continued to sit beside Lin Muyu. He took out a wine gourd and gulped down a mouthful of strong wine. But this is life. The more you want to escape from this war, the more you can't escape it. You hate killing, but you must face everything in front of you. In this battle, our hands will be stained with blood. Just wait and see. Right at this moment, suddenly, the sound came from the sky. A messenger bird rapidly landed on Feng Jixing's shoulder. He hurriedly took out the letter tube and swept his gaze across. His face was filled with astonishment as he said, "So fast. The volunteer army's advance heavy cavalry is already less than 300 miles away from Lanyan City. They will arrive before sunset today." Damn it, Lin Muyu sheathed her sword and lightly said, "Are they so eager to destroy Lanyan City?" Feng Jixing looked indifferent. Zhang Wei, pass down the order. The whole city is on alert. Prepare for war in the afternoon. In addition, has the Tianchong army of Seven Seas City returned? Zhang Wei nodded. They will arrive in 2 hours. That's good. Not long after, the sound of hooves could be heard in the fog. A commander came to the city with a long saber. It was the Empire's #1 warrior, Du Hai. Behind him were densely packed soldiers with shields. They were all infantrymen of the Tianchong army. In addition, there was an endless stream of rations. Open the gate. Du Hai shouted. Feng Jixing stood on the city wall and shouted, General Du Hai, how many people did you bring back? Du Hai raised his head to take a look and said with a smile, So it's Commander Feng. The Tianchong army is no longer as strong as before. Suppressing Demon Pass lost close to 10,000 men, and His Majesty took away 50,000 men. Now, there are less than 30,000 infantrymen and archers. Feng Jixing nodded. 30,000 is good. Come into the city. The Flying Mount Camp will guard the south gate, the Imperial Army will guard the north and east gates, and the Tianchong Army will guard the west gate. What does General think? Thank you. I will lead my brothers to the west gate. Du Hai was a candid man. Although his military rank was higher than Feng Jixing's, he could follow Feng Jixing's orders to defend the city. He could be considered a good general. Moreover, the volunteer army was coming aggressively. There were generals everywhere in the empire who had defected and surrendered. Du Hai's willingness to return to Lanyan City to defend at this time was enough to prove his loyalty. After watching the Tianchong army enter the city, Lin Muyu also stood up slowly. Holding her sword, she said, Wei Chou, how is the situation in the Eagle Nest camp? Wei Chou cupped his fists and said, All 724 brothers are on the north wall, ready to be deployed at any time. That's good. Everyone is equipped with a bow. Once the volunteer army enters the shooting range, just shoot them. Yes, I understand. It was close to noon. The sun pierced through the clouds and dispersed the fog. The Lingnan army's footsteps were getting closer. More and more messenger birds were flying in the sky. The news sent chills down people's spines. Lin Yu had led 100,000 soldiers and left Planet Earth Province. They had entered North Ridge Province and would arrive soon. In the direction of Tsangnan Province, Marshal Ji Yao of the League of Volunteers led an army of 250,000 people to Tsangnan Province. With Wang Lin as the vanguard, they successively conquered 17 cities between Lanyan City and Wugu City. They would reach the city in 6 hours. Near the Qinling Mountains, the Lingnan army soldiers were seen entering North Ridge. There was no news from Fairy Lake. Lin Muyu, Feng Jixing, Chu Huaying, and Du Hai were responsible for defending the city. Qin Lei led the imperial guards to defend Zetian Palace. The state general Ling Nantian supervised the battle. The entire Lanyan city was on the verge of a war. At this moment, Dupi Province, Fairy Lake. The lake water had been dyed red with blood. Countless corpses floated on the surface of the lake. Most of the corpses had begun to rot and were bloated. They were being eaten by fishes. Flags of the Tianchong army and Longquan army floated on the water. The blood flowed for hundreds of miles. The entire fairy lake was dead silent. Messy footprints covered the mud on the lakeside. A man had sunk deep into the shallow mud. Water plants were entangled around his red and swollen neck. His eyes were wide open and filled with indignation and anger. His palms were in the shape of claws. His fingernails were cracked. He had fought many battles in his life, but he was not strong enough. That was why he had drowned. No matter how arrogant he was when he was alive, how he was one of the 9 Supremes and how he controlled the universe. He was just a cold corpse after death. Chapter 295. At dusk, the heavy and dense sound of horse hooves came from outside the city. A large number of cavalrymen appeared in sight. They held up the banner of the volunteer army and wore blood-red armor. They stopped about a kilometer away from Lanyan City and started to get into formation. The cavalrymen were at the front and the infantry at the back. They also started to light torches, forming a dense mass. In the blink of an eye, night fell. The torches outside the city formed a sea that spread all the way to the direction of the dragon-seeking forest. The overwhelming number of soldiers was very frightening. Oh my! Zhang Wei felt his scalp go numb. He said, "The women of Lingnan are really fertile. They actually gave birth to so many beasts. Damn it, how long will it take for me to kill them all?" Wei Chou frowned. What are they waiting for? Waiting for the supply troops. Feng Jixing said indifferently, the ladders and catapults move slowly. They will only arrive here tomorrow. They are waiting. This night will be very difficult. Why is it difficult? Zhang Wei asked. Feng Jixing smiled. The commander of the front line is Long Qianlin. He is well versed in the art of war and naturally knows the power of psychological warfare. Just wait, they will be here soon. Yes. Torches were also raised on the city walls. It was a beautiful scene. Not long after, the Lingnan army parted. An envoy holding a white flag came to the city. He was a lean guy. He laughed toward the city walls and said, Lingnan General Long Qianlin has led 100,000 troops to deliver congratulatory gifts to the imperial capital. I hope the generals in the imperial capital will kindly accept them. As he said this, he waved the white flag. Instantly, hundreds of cavalrymen galloped to the city walls. They spread out a black object under the city walls and then mounted their horses and left. What is it? Zhang Wei frowned. Feng Jixing squinted and looked into the distance. Suddenly, his body trembled. He said, It's the war flag. What war flag? Lin Muyu was stunned. Feng Jixing gritted his teeth. The war flags of the Tianchong Legion and the Longquan Legion. Oh my God, there are at least 1,000 of them. The imperial army that His Majesty brought to Dubhe province has been destroyed. Ah? Lin Muyu felt as if his heart had been pierced through. His wishful thinking was that Qin Jin would definitely lead an army to return, but in the end he still received this cruel news. Wei Chou clenched his fists. How despicable! Are you trying to use the Empire's war flag to chill our morale? Lin Muyu's gaze turned cold as she said, Use fire arrows to burn these flags. Fire arrows were shot randomly from the city wall, and the flags on the ground quickly caught fire, turning into piles of ashes in the blink of an eye. From afar came the wild laughter of the volunteers, but they did not attack the city. Not long after, the war drums in the north rumbled, and another large group of people came. This time, it was the commander-in-chief Ji Yao. A group of infantry with shields in their hands moved slowly, escorting a general in a white robe. It was Ji Yao. Ji Yao's expression was extremely domineering. He laughed loudly and said, Who's the general guarding the northern gate? Come out and speak. Feng Jixing raised his blade and said coldly, Oh, it's General Ji Yao. Feng Jixing is here. Feng Jixing? Ji Yao looked up at the city and said calmly, I'm sure you've all seen it. The Tianchong army and the Longquan army have been defeated, and the Earthstar province, Songnan province, Lingdong province, and Heaven's Pivot province have also been conquered by us. 8 of the empire's 12 provinces are already in our hands. Why are you still holding on? Open the gates and welcome the volunteers into the city. I, Ji Yao, guarantee that you, Feng Jixing, will continue to be the commander of the Imperial Guard. How about it? Feng Jixing couldn't help but burst into laughter. Among the 7 divine generals of the empire, I, Feng Jixing, am ranked 3rd, and you, Ji Yao, are ranked 6th. If it weren't for the lack of talents in Lingnan, how could trash like you become a marshal? Ha, Ji Yao, attack the city if you want. I, Feng Jixing, await your arrival here. Stubborn fool. Ji Yao snorted coldly and abruptly pulled out his sword, pointing it at the city walls. I, Ji Yao, hereby declare that if Lanyan City refuses to surrender, I, Ji Yao, will slaughter everyone in the city on the day I take it. Not a single chicken or dog will be spared. You dogs of the empire, listen well. The Iha nation follows the will of the heavens and wins the hearts of the people. Overthrowing the monarchy is a must. If you dogs of the empire continue to be stubborn, you will only end up with your bones broken and ashes scattered. If you open the gates and surrender the city before sunrise tomorrow, I will let bygones be bygones. Otherwise, prepare to be slaughtered. He urged his horse to turn around and leave. The group of imperial generals on the city walls were all dumbfounded. Zhang Wei gnashed his teeth. Damn it, when did I become a dog of the empire? Luo Lai said, Commander, what should we do? What else can we do? Feng Jixing said indifferently, Everyone, prepare for battle. The real battle will begin at dawn tomorrow. Sir. As if they didn't want to let the defenders of Lanyan City rest, the volunteer army cheered for an entire night. The sound of the war drums never seemed to stop, and the flags below the city walls fluttered in the wind. What was worse was that the chariots they pushed out were filled with helmeted heads, all of which belonged to the Tianchong army and the Longquan army. The Battle of Fairy Lake was a complete one-sided defeat for the empire. At dawn, a blood-red ray of dawn pierced through the clouds and shone directly on the city walls of Lanyan City. Lin Mu opened her sleepy eyes and said, The battle has begun. Bang! The city walls suddenly shook. A huge rock had hit the wall and created a dent about a few meters deep. Although the city walls of Lanyan City were strong, they wouldn't be able to hold up for long if they kept going like this. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of the war drums was abnormally intense. Thousands of ladders were pushed out from the boundless battle formation of the volunteer soldiers. They were guarded by soldiers holding heavy shields as they slowly approached the city. It had been too long since such a large-scale war had taken place in the empire, so many imperial guards and the soldiers of the Flying Mount Battalion were bitterly disappointed. How could they defeat this group of courageous troops when there were so many enemies outside the city? Below the city walls, Long Lin, dressed in silver armor and holding a long spear, shouted, Attack the city! The first warrior to climb the city walls will be rewarded with 100,000 gold coins and be conferred the title of nobility. It's really Long Lin? Lin Muyu's eyes dimmed. Feng Jixing smiled at the side. Are you regretting letting him go back then? Lin Muyu smiled. What's there to regret? Didn't His Majesty kill Long Lin's parents to vent his anger? Feng Jixing was stunned. He smiled and patted her shoulder. Get ready to kill the enemy. Aim at the people pushing the ladders and shoot. On the city walls, Wei Chou had already pulled back the demon-devouring bow. The next moment, there was a clanging sound. The foot of the city walls lit up, and the volunteer army behind the ladders fell to the ground. In the next moment, most of the ladders entered the firing range. Arrows rained down from the top of the city wall, piercing into the bodies of the volunteer soldiers. In the blink of an eye, a large number of them fell to the ground. However, the ladders were still slowly approaching the city wall. Throw the rolling stones down to block the wheels of the ladders, Feng Jixing ordered loudly. Tens of thousands of stones were thrown down within a minute, and the ladders were blocked. The volunteer army hurriedly moved the stones away with their shields. Immediately, a round of shooting came from the top of the city walls. Blood quickly dyed the ground below the city walls red. The distance was too far, at least 200 meters. It was beyond the attack range of the demonic noise blade. Therefore, Lin Muyu could only pull back her treasured carving bow and shoot at the enemies in the distance. Although her archery was only second-rate, she was strong and ferocious. In just half an hour, she had killed dozens of people. Fortunately, she was well prepared. There were many arrows in Lanyan City, and it was enough to last for a long time. At this moment, a ladder rapidly approached the city walls. There were more than 10 volunteer army hanging on the ladder. All of them brandished their sabers and rushed up the city walls. Lin Muyu quickly unsheathed her long sword. With a flash of sword light, she chopped off the arms of a volunteer army. The rest of the volunteer army were quickly turned into porcupines. There were many guards on the city walls. If they wanted to attack the city by force, they would have to pay the price in blood. The attack lasted for about 4 hours. It seemed that the volunteer army had realized that such a consumption was meaningless. The conch horn sounded, and the army retreated from the city walls like a receding tide. The people on the city walls heaved a sigh of relief. Zhang Wei raised his bloodied saber and laughed loudly at the volunteer army below the city walls. "I thought you were divine soldiers who descended from the heavens. It turns out that you are just a bunch of cowardly dogs. Long Qianlin, if you have the guts, come and attack the city again. We are waiting for you here." Wei Chou and the others also laughed loudly. Behind them, bundles of arrows had been used up. However, it did not matter. The Imperial Guards quickly carried more up. Below the city walls, Long Qianlin looked at the city walls with a stern gaze. He did not say anything and immediately turned his horse around and left. In the blink of an eye, it was already afternoon. The tired soldiers were sitting on the walkways and resting. A warm spring breeze blew in from the south. Lin Muyu sat by the battlement and slowly wiped the blood off her blade. She looked at Wei Chou, Xiahou Sang, and the others and joked, "If you can defend Lanyan City, I will reward each of you with a wife." Wei Chou could not help but blush. "Commander, you must be joking." Xiahou Sang laughed. "How can one wife be enough? If Milord is generous, please give me a third wife. Oh no, a fifth wife. Let's talk about that when you are able to defend the city." At this moment, someone suddenly pointed at the sky in surprise and said, "Look, what's that?" Everyone looked over and saw countless pieces of paper flying in the air. They were kites that flew into the city along with the spring breeze. Lin Muyu's heart thumped. "It must be something bad." She said, "Bring the kite with the short string." A member of the Imperial Guards immediately descended the city walls and soon came back with a kite with words written on its back. Lin Muyu took it and looked at it. The words on the back of the kite were very few, but each word was heart-wrenching. His Highness the Prince of Jinan led 1,000,000 troops to the north and swore to overthrow the monarchy and establish a Iha kingdom where everyone was equal. Wherever the brave and righteous soldiers passed, they would kill the heartless nobles and distribute the land equally. Each family would receive land based on the number of people they had and would be exempted from taxes for 3 years. Lanyan City is the capital of the world. May the people in the city give up resistance and leave the city to surrender. They will all be citizens of the Iha kingdom. If they continue to resist stubbornly, the day the city is breached will be the day the brave and righteous soldiers will slaughter all living things in the city, leaving no one alive. Chapter 296. What's written? Feng Jixing asked. Lin Muyu handed it over. Feng Jixing glanced at it and his scalp went numb. He gritted his teeth and said, "Despicable, this is too despicable. Is he trying to divide the hearts of the people in Lanyan City? This is the most powerful part of Long Qianlin." Lin Muyu sighed. Feng Jixing asked, "How many kites like this are there in the city?" The Imperial Guards replied, "Countless. The commoners are reading it and it can't be stopped." "Oh no," Feng Jixing frowned, "what should we do? The city is already short of provisions. If the commoners make a ruckus, I'm afraid Lanyan City will collapse on its own. Zhang Wei said, "What's wrong with that? If those unruly commoners dare to make a ruckus, we'll just kill them." "Don't be reckless." Feng Jixing looked at Lin Muyu and asked, "Do you have any ideas?" Lin Muyu looked at the volunteer soldiers that blotted out the sky and earth outside the city and said lightly, "Let them pay them back in their own coin. Let the people from the minister's residence immediately write 100,000 letters and pretend that it is a letter sent from the Five Valleys city. Just say that the volunteer soldiers are very hypocritical and had already massacred the entire Five Valleys city. The city walls are filled with human heads and it is only death if one surrenders. Distribute these letters in Lanyan City and perhaps it can curb their psychological attack." "Good." Feng Jixing's eyes lit up and he smiled. "You still have a way. Do it." "Yes, General." Lin Muyu leaned against the blood-stained city wall, feeling an indescribable discomfort in her heart. Iha country promoted equality for everyone and adopted the equal distribution system to appease the people. This was a level of civilization that was far above the imperial system, yet she was here as the empire's dog in their words. Was she doing the right thing or wrong thing? However, after looking at the Tianchong army and Longquan army's war flags that had been reduced to ashes, Lin Muyu felt a little relieved. What equality for all? What equal land system? It was just a ploy to usurp the world. If everyone was truly equal, then the soldiers of the Longquan army and Tianchong army also had parents, wives, and children. Where was their equality? Even if the world changed its master, it would just be a different person enslaving the people. The only hope for survival was to defend and wait for reinforcements. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed, but there was still no sign of reinforcements. The citizens in the city had already caused a ruckus, and even the capital's treasury had been smashed and looted twice. In the Zetian Palace, the officials were at their wits' end. A wisp of green smoke lingered above the incense burner, and Qin Yin's beautiful eyes were red. After hearing the news of the East Patrol Army's defeat, she had cried for 3 consecutive days. She had grown up under her father's care since she was young, so her relationship with Qin Jin was naturally different. Now that Qin Jin had mostly died in battle at Fairy Lake, half of Qin Yin's world had collapsed. The other half was Lin Muyu. "What's the situation with the volunteer soldiers?" Qin Yin raised her head and asked the crowd. Chu Huayin cupped his fists and said, "They are no longer attacking the city recklessly. Instead, they are using catapults to continuously destroy the city walls. The walls are already damaged in many places. If this continues, I'm afraid that Lanyan City will not be able to hold out for long." "There is an even more pressing problem," Feng Jixing said. Qin Yin was stunned. "General Feng, what problem?" "We don't have enough provisions for the war horses." Feng Jixing said, "The Imperial Guards have 10,000 cavalrymen, and the Flying Mount Battalion has 17,000 cavalrymen. In addition to the 4,000 war horses from the Imperial Guards and the supply of other war horses in the city, there are more than 30,000 war horses in Lanyan City that need to be fed. However, there are a total of 19 fodder farms around Lanyan City, and they have already been occupied by the volunteer soldiers. Before dawn tomorrow, our fodder will all be used up. In other words, after tomorrow, there will be no more cavalrymen in the city. What should we do?" Qin Yin was a little anxious. "Without the cavalrymen, we won't even have the strength to counterattack." Feng Jixing said plainly, "That's right." As he said this, he suddenly laughed. "What are you laughing at, General Feng?" Qin Yin asked. "As far as I know, they have mobilized a total of 35 people to surround Lanyan City. The rations of these 35 people for a day are already quite large. Earthstar Province is far away from here, so they may not be able to transport the rations here. Therefore, the provisions of these 350,000 volunteer soldiers come from Tsangnan Province. According to the intelligence, most of the provisions of the volunteer soldiers are hoarded in Qiufeng Town, 30 miles east of Lanyan City. As long as we burn the provisions of Qiufeng Town, I'm afraid that the volunteer soldiers will collapse on their own." Qin Yin pursed her red lips and said, "How to burn the provisions of Qiufeng Town is the key to the problem. General Feng, do you have a good plan?" Feng Jixing smiled faintly. We can try, but the price will not be small, and we need the assistance of you. Lin Muyu smiled at the side. Brother Feng is talking about a diversion, right? Yes. A light flashed in Feng Jixing's eyes as he said, I have inspected the situation of the volunteer soldiers on all sides of Lanyan City today. There are the most people gathered outside the North City Wall, and the least outside the East City Wall. There are at most 30,000 infantry soldiers defending. In my opinion, we can send a cavalry to attack the volunteer soldiers outside the East Gate at night. No! Chu Huayin raised his eyebrows and said, I have also checked carefully. Although there are only 30,000 volunteer soldiers outside the East Gate, the birds in the forest in the distance are constantly flying away. There must be an ambush. That is just a trap set by Lin. I know. Feng Jixing smiled and said, I will lead 10,000 Imperial cavalry to rush out of the East Gate to attract their attention. Chu Huayin, you can lead 17,000 flying mount battalion soldiers to attack from the South Gate. The army will go straight to Qiufeng town. Chu Huayin squinted his eyes. Our opponent is Lin. Will he not send an ambush to intercept the flying mount battalion? He will, and he will definitely. Feng Jixing smiled and said, but we still have a trump card in our hand. Lin Muyu smiled at the side. I know, the Longdan army camp. Yes. Feng Jixing laughed heartily. The real trump card is the Longdan army camp. The Imperial Guards and the Flying Mount Battalion are both feigning an attack. The important task of burning the volunteer soldiers' rations will be done by the Longdan army camp. Although Long Lin is very scheming, he will never expect us to use this double decoy strategy when we are at the end of the road. Lei Hong couldn't help but clap and laughed. The younger generation will surpass us in time. It is a great fortune for the Empire to have generals like Feng Jixing, Chu Huayin, and you. Qin Yin said happily, that's good. I will leave the night attack to General Feng. Yes, I will not disappoint your Highness's expectations. Qin Yin glanced at the officials and said, this operation is very confidential, so none of the officials present can leave Zetian Palace Hall. You can return to your residence tomorrow. Yes, Your Highness. In the afternoon, Lin Muyu sent a letter to Mount Long Yenshan. She used a high-altitude messenger bird. This was a bird specially domesticated by the animal trainers in Lanyan City. It would not become a target for enemy archers when it flew in the air. At dusk, she received a reply from Luoyu. It was a letter written by Luoyu, indicating that the materials to ignite the fire had been prepared. In accordance with Lin Muyu's orders, the 20,000 elites of the Longdan army camp went straight to Autumn Wind Town without any delay. As night fell, the rumbling sound of catapults came from the four walls of Lanyan City. Boulders were shot from both inside and outside the city. Boulders fell into the city one after another, killing and injuring countless people. Miserable screams could be heard from inside the city, but this was war, and no one could change it. At night, the streets of the city were silent. 10,000 Imperial soldiers were waiting in formation. Feng Jixing was wearing an iron armor and holding a wind cutter in his hand. He slowly put on his helmet and said to Lin Muyu and Chu Huayin with a faint smile on his face, I am going. 2 hours later, the two of you will rush out of the West Gate with the Flying Mount camp. Remember, don't be obsessed with fighting. After attracting enough volunteer soldiers, rush back to the city. General Du Hai will lead the Tianchong army to the west of the city to receive you. Lin Muyu said with a smile. However, Feng Jixing took a deep look at the two of them, as if he couldn't bear to see them die. After a few seconds, he said, You two brats, come back alive. I, Feng Jixing, only have you two brothers in my life. Chu Huayin clenched his fists and said, Don't worry, our lives are very tough. Lin Muyu smiled and said, Brother Feng, you have to come back alive too. Wait for us to come back and drink this celebratory wine. But the city gate slowly rose. There were a total of 8 city gates under the East City Wall, and all of them rose. A dense group of Imperial soldiers rushed out on horseback. Almost all of them were equipped with spears and round shields. Their war horses were also the best horses in the empire, and their combat power couldn't be underestimated. After watching Feng Jixing leave, Lin Muyu said, "Brother, let's go. Have you seen Sister Chu Yao?" Chu Huaying laughed and said, "Brat, are you worried that we won't be able to come back alive?" Lin Muyu nodded and said, "I'm indeed worried." "Don't worry, we'll come back. Let's go, don't let Yao worry. She's with the people from the spiritual medicine department and is treating people in the casualty barracks." "Okay." Not long after, the sounds of killing filled the air outside the East City Wall. Feng Jixing's imperial soldiers had already clashed with the volunteer soldiers. The volunteer soldiers from all directions immediately swarmed over, as if they wanted to tear the 10,000 imperial soldiers into pieces at the first opportunity. After a while, all 8 city gates rose. Nearly 20,000 flying mount battalions heavy cavalry surged out of the city and headed straight for the volunteer soldiers outside the west gate. The sound of the horses' hooves shook the heavens and the earth. It was as if the entire Lanyan city was trembling because of this battle. Lin Muyu held the dragon spirit sword in her hand, and the horse she was riding on was snorting. She quickly rushed to the front of the cavalry formation with her master and walked side by side with Chu Huang. Under the moonlight, the volunteer soldiers' camp could be vaguely seen. In the distance, the volunteer soldiers raised their shields and shouted, "The dogs of the Empire are here, prepare for battle. Go!" Lin Muyu spurred her horse forward even faster. With a sudden wave of her hand, the golden gourd wall emerged from her body and blocked the front of the flying mount battalion's charging formation behind her. Papa! The long spears that were thrown by the volunteer soldiers were deflected. The warhorse suddenly neighed and leaped over the first shield formation. Lin Muyu turned around and swept her longsword across. The sword light flashed across and the group of volunteer soldiers' bodies and shields were sliced into pieces. Fresh blood quickly permeated the air, and there were sounds of violent collisions all around. One could well imagine the consequences of the high-speed heavy cavalry colliding with the shield formation. The shield formation of the volunteer soldiers collapsed almost immediately. The well-trained flying mount battalion quickly brandished their weapons and slashed at the enemy's encampment, cleaving through the waves and directly killing their way into the encampment. The dragon spirit sword flashed, and a volunteer soldier stood dumbfounded on the spot. A second later, he realized that his right arm had been sent flying along with his iron spear. He immediately let out a miserable howl, and in the next moment he was trampled into a pile of meat paste by the iron hooves of the warhorse. Chapter 297. Be careful of the arrow formation. Chu Huang suddenly pulled on the reins and led the cavalry to charge towards the side of the formation. Everyone raised their shields. In the north, thousands of archers shot a dense barrage of arrows in the darkness. However, this was the strength of the heavy-armored cavalry. After withstanding a round of arrows, only a few of them suffered minor injuries. Not a single one of them died in battle. Swish! The invisible sharp blade shuttled through the crowd. Under Lin Muyu's control, the demonic noise blade quickly killed more than 10 people. It followed its master like a shadow, but none of the volunteer soldiers could see how this sharp blade killed them. The heaven beast's refined soul kept roaring, and it was breathtaking. The dragon spirit sword flew out with the luster of the golden gourd. With a pop sound, it pierced through multiple heavy shields and rapidly exploded. The battle energy transformed into a shock wave that shook 7 or 8 people away. It also quickly tore apart the defensive formation formed by this group of volunteer soldiers. Further ahead, there were still layers of defensive barriers waiting for the flying mount battalion. Long Qianlin was already prepared. Rather than saying that Lin Muyu and Chu Huang were attacking at night, it was more like they were walking into a trap. It seemed that Long Qianlin had also guessed that the Empire would launch a life-and-death battle. Thus, he arranged more than 10 heavy shield formations and archer formations in the camp. Behind them, there was an even more terrifying spear formation. This was the most terrifying method of battle for the heavy-armored cavalry. Be careful! Chu Huayan spurred his horse and rushed to the front with his sword in hand. Suddenly, his sword flashed and knocked away the tips of several spears. He spurred his horse and charged into the spear formation, brandishing his sword and killing indiscriminately. Behind him, the well-organized flying mount battalion charged forward together with him. As they broke through the spear formation, many soldiers of the flying mount battalion were pierced by the spears. Lin Muyu held her sword and rushed side by side with Chu Huaying. The dragon spirit sword cut through iron as if it was mud. With just one slash, a group of spears were cut in half. She raised her palm and activated the first element, profound energy, chaos of the common people. Countless celestial bodies rampaged within the crowd, and in the blink of an eye, nearly 20 volunteer soldiers had turned into corpses. Their bodies were covered in blood, and under the impact of the 7 planets' profound energy, their blood vessels were in turmoil, and their bodies exploded. At this time, there was only one word in Lin Muyu's heart: kill. All the benevolence and righteousness had also vanished at this moment. Being kind to the enemy was being cruel to oneself. He still understood this principle. Moreover, this group of volunteer soldiers were not good people. Most of them were the private army of the Jinan king, Qin Yi, and not the imperial army fighting for the country. In contrast, the winged cavalry battalion, the imperial army that was fighting to protect the capital from being massacred, was much more noble. Chu Huaijin turned to look at Lin Muyu and said, "Conserve your energy. Don't use your martial soul and battle chi. This is a war, and we don't know how long this battle will last. You have to maintain your physical strength and dark force." Lin Muyu nodded and said, "Got it, Brother Chu." Just as Chu Huaijin had said, the winged cavalry battalion had been killing for a full half an hour, but they still hadn't managed to break through the encirclement. Moreover, war was originally an art. This battle was more like a battle of attrition. Whoever could last until the end would be the winner. Chu Huaijin was very smart, and he understood the principle of using the least amount of energy to kill the most people. Lin Muyu slowly restrained her true chi and martial soul. It wasn't bad to just rely on her strong physique to kill the enemy. The dragon spirit sword was sharp, and the Jedi warhorse was fully armored. The number of volunteer soldiers who died under the dragon spirit sword didn't decrease too much. Feng Jixing once said that in war, absolute power wasn't absolute. War was like a huge meat grinder. No matter how strong a person was, they would also lose their strength and life in war. A Heaven Realm expert was equivalent to 100 soldiers, a Sanctuary Realm expert was equivalent to 1,000 soldiers, and a God Realm expert was equivalent to 10,000 soldiers. Once the number of people killed exceeded this number, they would probably be exhausted. What was the difference between a Sanctuary or God Realm expert who had exhausted his battle chi and Immortal? Under the leadership of Lin Muyu and Chu Huaying, the Flying Mount Battalion charged forward like they were reaping wheat. Countless volunteer soldiers had already died under the iron hooves of the Flying Mount Battalion, but it seemed as though there was no end to these volunteer soldiers. More and more torches were gathering in the distance. It was obvious that the Flying Mount Battalion had attracted the attention of the volunteer soldiers, and they had started to increase their numbers. "Commander!" A winged cavalry battalion's commandant pulled out a bloody spear from a corpse. The spear splashed on his face, but he didn't care. With a pale face, he said, "We can't break through. The volunteer soldiers are constantly increasing their numbers. At least 150,000 soldiers are rushing towards us from all directions. If we don't retreat now, I'm afraid we won't have a chance." Chu Huaijin looked up at the stars in the sky and said, "It's not midnight yet, continue to charge forward." Lin Muyu remained silent. Behind her, 70 Imperial Guards from the Eagle's Nest camp had also joined the Winged Cavalry Battalion's battle formation. Each of them brandished their weapons and slashed at the volunteer soldiers. However, there were constant stray arrows on both sides, and many of them were already injured. Even Wei Chao's chest was pierced by an arrow, and he was bleeding profusely. Although the Winged Cavalry Battalion had killed many enemies, they had also suffered many casualties. However, this was war. The Winged Cavalry Battalion's mission was to attract more volunteer soldiers to gather here, and then to fight for the best time for the Longdan army camp to burn down the Lingnan rations. As they charged forward, they looked up towards the east. It was completely dark there. Lin Muyu's heart was filled with apprehension. She didn't know if the Longdan army camp had set off. With the level of elites in the Longdan army camp, as long as there were less than 5 volunteer soldiers guarding the granary, she believed that they would be able to successfully attack. Everything depended on Luo Yu and Fengxi. They didn't know how long they had been charging back and forth, but the more they killed, the more volunteer soldiers there were. Lin Muyu's white battle robe was already dyed red with blood, and Chu Huaijin wasn't much worse off. Chu Huaijin's shoulder was even injured. This was the work of a spear thrower. The spear pierced through Chu Huaijin's fragile battle armor and directly injured him. Looking at the stars in the sky and calculating the time, Lin Muyu said, "It's about time, let's break through the encirclement." But Chu Huaijin turned around and charged out with his sword. He shouted, "Turn around." The entire cavalry formation quickly turned around and rushed towards the volunteer soldiers. However, a black shadow quickly attacked them from the sky. It was the spear thrower. These spears were very sharp, and they instantly pierced through the bodies of many winged cavalry battalion soldiers. The soldiers and their war horses were twisted together and trampled on each other. It was a tragic sight. However, Lin Muyu, Chu Huaijin, and the others didn't hesitate at all. They continued to lead the survivors and charged forward. Swoosh! The battle energy raged again. Lin Muyu opened her hands, and the golden gourd martial soul shone brightly. Golden gourd vines whizzed through the gaps in the crowd and suddenly separated the volunteer soldiers from the spear formation, opening up a path for the winged cavalry battalion. Well done. Chu Huaijin laughed loudly. He waved his sword and cut off the head of a volunteer soldier. He shouted, "Brothers of the winged cavalry battalion, we have completed our mission. It's time to go home." However, it was destined that many people wouldn't be able to go home. The volunteer soldiers swarmed over and separated the cavalry at the back into small groups. They completely separated the rear part of the cavalry. Then, they wantonly stabbed their spears, piercing the brave heavy cavalry and their warhorses like hedgehogs. In less than 10 minutes, at least 1,000 winged cavalry battalion soldiers had their blood spilled on this piece of land. Lin Muyu couldn't help but look back. Her heart was filled with pity, but this was war. It sharpened his will and helped him to grow and change. Heroes are created by the times. Perhaps this was the moment right now. Kill! The killing intent in his eyes intensified. He waved his right hand, and the dragon spirit sword flew out under the energy of the imperial fire sword. He raised his hand and took out the pear blossom spear from his Jiankuan bag. He suddenly shook the spear, and the spearhead drilled into the abdomen of a volunteer soldier, sending him flying and smashing him into another group of people. At the same time, the spear soul was suddenly activated. An ice Kirin roared and rushed into the crowd, freezing a group of volunteer soldiers into ice and then crushing them. The moment the pear blossom spear appeared, many volunteer soldiers were scared and retreated. At this time, Chu Huaijin didn't hold back his battle energy anymore. On his shoulder, the purple marten martial soul shone brightly. He raised his left hand, and a crescent energy fell from the sky and blasted into the crowd. Then, starlight pierced through the bodies of the volunteer soldiers. Although the star-picking finger was elegant, it wasn't inferior when it came to killing. When he returned to about 200 meters away from the city gate was already surrounded by a dense mass of volunteer soldiers. A group of spearmen swarmed over, and a fierce general with the rank of Chiliarch shouted, "Cut off their retreat. It's easy to come out, but they want to return to the city? Dream on." Lin Muyu didn't hesitate and said, "Kill." At this moment, the city gate suddenly opened, and a familiar voice roared, "Warriors of the imperial capital, kill your way out and support the brothers of the Flying Mount Battalion. Archers on the city wall, fire your arrows and kill those southern barbarian spearmen." It was Du Hai, the #1 warrior of the empire. He led the Tianchong army out of the city and quickly broke through the phalanx formed by this group of spearmen. Lin Muyu and Chu Huaijin also took the opportunity to lead the Flying Mount Battalion back into the city. They didn't continue to fight. Outside the city, There were soldiers of the Flying Mount Battalion dying in battle every second. Lanyan City couldn't bear any more losses. Unknowingly, the Flying Mount Battalion had been killing outside for more than 4 hours. The eastern sky was already turning bright. Below the city wall, Du Hai scared off the Iha Nation's army with 2 slashes. He returned to the city and checked on the damage done to the Flying Mount Battalion. Lin Muyu looked back and saw that Wei Chou, Xiahou Sang, and the others were all injured. She also had an arrow in her arm. She didn't even know when the arrow was shot. "Commander, you're injured," Wei Chou said hurriedly. "I'm fine." Lin Muyu reached out and pulled out the arrow in pain. She asked, "How's the situation of the Eagle Nest Battalion?" Wei Chou looked gloomy and said, 17 Imperial Guards and more than 300 Imperial Guards died in battle." "Oh," Lin Muyu responded faintly, but her heart ached. The Flying Mount Battalion marched slowly on the main road of the city. There were torches on both sides of the road, and many commoners were watching from both sides. However, the commoners' eyes were clearly filled with indifference. This made Lin Muyu feel even more distressed. In this battle, the Flying Mount Battalion sent 17,000 people out of the city, and less than 5,000 people returned. So many people died, but she didn't know who it was for. Chapter 298. Pa! A hard object smashed into Lin Muyu's face, but he quickly caught it with one hand. It was a piece of dry, hard bread. He looked up and saw that the person who threw the bread was a child about 10 years old. His face was full of childishness. His grandfather's face was ashen as he hurriedly said, "Sir, this child doesn't know any better. Please don't blame him." Lin Muyu looked at him indifferently, then her gaze fell on the child. "Why did you throw bread at me?" The child's eyes were filled with hatred that didn't match his age. "You dogs of the Empire, why don't you let the Iha Nation's army enter Lanyan City? As long as they enter, Grandpa will be able to obtain land and our family will be able to eat soft bread every day." Lin Muyu smiled and rode up to him. She looked down at him and said, "Are you sure the Iha Nation's army will give you bread after entering Lanyan City and not take away what you still have?" The child shook his head. "No, the Iha Nation's army is all good people." On the side, Wei Chou slowly walked over with his sword in hand and said indifferently, "Commander, as long as you give the order, this subordinate will execute this ignorant little bastard for attacking the Imperial army." The child's grandfather immediately knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. "Sir, please don't. He's still young and doesn't know any better. Please don't kill him." Lin Muyu shook her head and said, "Forget it. Let's go and let everyone rest early." Wei Chou nodded. However, at this moment, a cold brick smashed into Xiahou Sang's face with a swoosh, causing his nose to bleed profusely. Xiahou Sang was already injured and looked like he was on the verge of death. He raised his head and saw that the person who smashed him was a young man in his 20s. In a fit of rage, he immediately drew his sword and shouted, "Bastard, you don't want to live anymore?" The young man quickly turned around and disappeared into the alley. Xiahou Sang wanted to give chase, but Lin Muyu hurriedly said, "Xiahou, come back. Don't give chase. Don't cause unnecessary trouble." Xiahou Sang's face was full of grievance. His eyes were red, and the hand holding the sword was trembling slightly. "Sir, I, Xiahou Sang, have been loyal to the Empire all my life. Aren't we protecting these lowly commoners by fighting for the Empire? Why do they treat us like this? I, Xiahou, have never suffered such injustice in my life." Lin Muyu said indifferently, "You and I are both soldiers of the Empire. This is something we must bear. Enough, let's go back to camp." "Yes." Just as Lin Muyu and the others were about to enter the Eagle Nest Battalion's campsite, a messenger from the Flying Mount Battalion suddenly galloped over and happily said, "Commander Lin, it's a success." "Success? What succeeded?" "Our plan worked. The Autumn Wind town in the east is on fire." Lin Muyu hurriedly went straight to the northern city wall. The moment she climbed up the city wall, she saw the eastern fire soaring into the sky. Sure enough, the Autumn Wind town where the volunteer soldiers were hoarding rations was on fire. It seemed like the people from the Longdan army camp had succeeded. The sound of messenger birds flapping their wings could be heard in the air. A bird slowly landed. Lin Muyu took the letter tube and looked at it. It was a letter from Luoyu. Sir, the mission has been completed. The rations camp in the autumn wind town has been reduced to ashes. They sent 40,000 soldiers to defend it. The Longdan army camp lost 5,000 soldiers and many were injured. Please punish them. Lin Muyu felt distressed and happy at the same time. She replied, well done. Continue to guard the Dragon Rocky Mountain and wait for my orders. At this moment, she turned around and saw a group of people walking over. It was Feng Jixing, Zhang Wei, Luo Lai, and the other imperial guards. Feng Jixing looked up and saw Lin Muyu on the city wall. He said loudly, You, how are you? I heard you were injured? It's just a small injury. It's not a big deal. Brother Feng, what's the situation with the imperial guards? They lost 3,000 soldiers. Their main force is not at the east gate. Oh, that's good. Feng Jixing looked at the dawn in the east and said, since the rations camp of the volunteer soldiers has been burned, they won't be able to hold on for long. It's almost dawn. Let's go. Her Highness Yin is still waiting for our reply in Zetian Palace Hall. All right. There was no time to tidy up her clothes. Lin Muyu brought Wei Chou and Xiahou Sang with her to Zetian Palace Hall. Feng Jixing was almost the same as Lin Muyu. Everyone's battle robes were blood red. Even the dark blue imperial military uniform under their armor was dyed dark red. It was a clear proof of the word, bathed in blood. In Zetian Palace Hall, the maidservants blew out the immortal crane lanterns one after another. The officials were still waiting anxiously in the main hall. At this moment, Feng Jixing, Lin Muyu, Chu Huayin, and the other generals entered the main hall. An attendant immediately shouted excitedly, Commander Feng Jixing, Commander Chu Huayin, and Madame Lin Muyu request an audience. Qin Yin was currently sleeping with her face resting on her hands. She immediately opened her eyes when she heard this voice and rushed to the imperial steps. She looked at Lin Muyu with pleasant surprise and said, Brother Yu, did you succeed? Lin Muyu nodded. I have already received a letter from the Longdan army camp. The volunteer army's rations and fodder camp have been burned to the ground. That's great. Qin Yin was overjoyed. However, when her gaze landed on Lin Muyu, her heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife. You're injured? It's nothing. It's just a small injury. Everyone is injured. Lin Muyu smiled. Qin Yin was now the master of Lanyan City. She was everyone's highness. Qin Yin belonged to everyone, not just him, Lin Muyu. Although he knew that Qin Yin loved him deeply, he couldn't act recklessly at this time. Otherwise, he would disappoint her. Qin Yin seemed to be aware of Lin Muyu's meaning. A shy smile flashed across her beautiful face as she said, I know. As she spoke, Qin Yin turned around and walked up the imperial steps. She sat down on the throne and said, Everyone has worked hard. Commander Feng Jixing is the main contributor in this attack to burn Qin Yi's rations. Commander Chu Huayin and Brother Yu are the secondary contributors. After the battle is over, there will be great rewards. All right, is there any news from Qihai City and Muyu City? Du Hai gritted his teeth and said, There's news from Muyu City. Duke Yun replied and informed us that there was another heavy snowfall after spring in Yunzhong province. Moreover, it lasted for 5 days. The heavy snowfall has blocked the Yunzhong ancient road. Even though Duke Yun has gathered 200,000 troops, he is unable to come over. Hence, Your Highness must hold on. Once the Muyu City army has cleared the snow, they will naturally send reinforcements. 5 days of heavy snowfall can delay the journey of 200,000 troops? The veins on Feng Jixing's handsome face popped. He said, Excuses. This is simply an excuse. Su Muyun is clearly making up an excuse. He wants to wait until the day our Lanyan City falls before the snow melts. General Feng, please watch your words. Minister Luo Xing sneered. Duke Yun is Your Highness' maternal grandfather. He will not sit and watch Lanyan City fall. Don't you understand such simple logic? Feng Jixing laughed. I only know how to use troops. I don't know the ways of the world. Please enlighten me, Lord Luo Xing. Luo Xing snorted coldly and did not speak again. Qin Yin continued to ask, is there any news from Qihai City? It has been so many days. Xiao Yin should have reached Qihai City long ago, right? Is there no news at all? Du Hai cupped his fists and said, Your Highness, Qihai City lost 60,000 troops at demon-subduing pass because you Wuxia underestimated the enemy. Their strength is greatly weakened. Perhaps Duke Lan is still angry and is unwilling to send troops? This general thinks that Your Highness should write another letter to explain the current crisis of Lanyan City. I believe that Duke Lan will definitely send troops. Qin Yin nodded. Alright, I understand. At this moment, a middle-aged general suddenly rushed into the hall. It was the commander of the city patrol. He cupped his fists and said, Your Highness, something bad has happened. There is a large hole in the east wall. The Iha nation's army is attacking. What? Qin Yin stood up abruptly and said, How many people have attacked? About 2,000, and they are still increasing. However, the Imperial Guards have already gone to stop them. I understand. Qin Yin waved her hand and said, Send more reinforcements. We must drive all the volunteer soldiers out of Lanyan City. Also, repair the wall immediately. It must be done within a day. Otherwise, don't come to see me. Yes, Your Highness. The commander of the city patrol walked out of the hall with a pale face. Chu Huaijin cupped his fists and said, Your Highness, this general will lead the Flying Mount Battalion to intercept the volunteer soldiers who have entered the city. Commander Chu, you have worked hard. Go. Yes. Feng Jixing watched Chu Huaijin's back as he left. He looked up at Qin Yin and said, Your Highness, the Iha nation's catapults are very powerful. The four walls of Lanyan City have been seriously damaged. I'm afraid they won't be able to hold on for long. I know. Qin Yin stared blankly into the distance and murmured, There's no news from Seven Seas City and Sunset Rain City. We can only do our best and leave the rest to fate. Let's just let Lanyan City hold on for as long as we can. Yes, Your Highness. At this moment, a general suddenly crawled into the hall, covered in blood. He was in a sorry state. There were even tears in his eyes. The tears flowed down and mixed with the blood on his face. For you, Feng Jixing shouted, How can you be so rude? The general wiped the tears in his eyes and said, I am Zhang Zhong, the commander of the Imperial Guard's Iron Foot Battalion. Commander, don't you recognize me? General Zhang Zhong? Feng Jixing couldn't help but laugh. How did you end up like this? The warriors of the Imperial Guards are all warriors of the Qin clan. We are calm and unruffled. You don't look like you are calm and unruffled at all. Zhang Zhong bawled and fished out a blood-stained letter from his chest. He said, I risked my life to snatch an empire's messenger bird from the chaotic army. I obtained this letter from His Majesty. Commander, Your Highness, His Majesty isn't dead yet. What? Father isn't dead. Qin Yin hurriedly stood up and ran down the steps. She snatched the letter from Zhang Zhong's hand and saw a line of words clearly written on it. It was Qin Jin's handwriting. We and the Tianchong army fought our way out of the encirclement and were surrounded on Mount Tianho on the way back to the capital. Please rescue us quickly. Qin Yin's hand trembled as she held the letter. Tears flowed from her eyes. Father isn't dead. Father is still alive. Woo! Chapter 299. Tianming Mountain. Tianming Mountain. Feng Jixing held the letter in his hand and said with a frown, Heaven's Edge Mountain is a lone peak. Once it is surrounded, it will be impossible to descend. If there is no military force to coordinate from the inside and outside, it will be a dangerous place. As he spoke, Feng Jixing cupped his fists and said, Your Highness Yin, Feng Jixing requests to lead the Imperial Army to rescue Your Majesty. No, not possible. The person who objected was Chu Chu. With a solemn face, he said, Regardless of whether this letter is real or fake, even if His Majesty is really surrounded in Tianming Mountain, the Imperial Army must not leave Lanyan City. Lanyan City only has this amount of military force. Once the imperial army leaves, there will only be 40 to 50,000 men and horses. How can they stop the Iha country's 300,000 troops? Feng Jixing looked up at Chu Chu and said, Chu, His Majesty is the ruler of this world. As officials, how can we not save him? Taking 10,000 steps back, His Majesty is Xiao Yin's father and treats us like nephews. Do you think that we should not rescue His Majesty? Lin Muyu was silent for a few seconds and said, We should rescue. How about this? I will order the Longdan army camp to rescue His Majesty and the Imperial Army will continue to stay in Lanyan City. What does Big Brother Feng think? Feng Jixing's face was a little pale and he did not speak. Lin Muyu saw through his thoughts. Big Brother Feng is? You do not trust the Longdan army camp? Feng Jixing held the beheading wind blade and his eyes were filled with determination. This time, His Majesty must not have any accidents. I have made up my mind. Feng Jixing will lead the 30,000 Imperial Army to break out of the encirclement and rescue His Majesty at Tianming Mountain. Requesting for Your Highness Yin's permission. Qin Yi nodded, permission granted. Her heart was concerned about Qin Jin's life and death and was more determined than Feng Jixing. Lin Muyu sighed and did not say anything else. She only said, In that case, I will lead the Eagle Nest camp to clear the way for Brother Feng. No. Feng Jixing shook his head and said, You can't stay in Lanyan City. You have to go to Dragon Rocky Mountain, personally command the Longdan army camp, and fight your way back to Lanyan City. Only then can the Longdan army camp be stationed in Lanyan City. Feng Jixing looked at him deeply and said, Big Brother Feng will protect His Majesty, and you will protect Xiao Yin, okay? No matter which one of us survives, we must continue on this path. Lin Muyu felt a lump in her throat. She couldn't help but turn her face away and say, Lin Muyu will obey your orders. Feng Jixing patted his shoulder and squeezed out an ugly smile on his blood-stained face. We'll leave in 2 hours. Can you accompany Xiao Yin well during this time? Yes. Lin Muyu's heart sank. She knew what Feng Jixing meant. It was easier said than done to fight their way out of the encirclement and then fight their way back. This was a path that was accompanied by death. Whether they could come back or not depended on the will of the heavens. Qin Yin stood up and took Lin Muyu's hand. Let's go take a look at Father's kitchen? Yes. The two entered the rear hall. The attendants did not follow them, but they all stayed where they were with mournful expressions. Everyone could feel that Seven Seas City and Muyu City had refused to send troops. This might be the last few days of the Empire's existence on the continent. In the rear hall, all the kitchen utensils that Qin Jin had used were placed neatly. Qin Yin pulled Lin Muyu's hand to the window sill of the side hall. Under the window was a polished bronze mirror. Qin Yin slowly sat down and picked up a comb. She said with a smile, Big Brother Yu, can you comb Xiao Yin's hair? In the past, it was father who combed my hair. Lin Muyu felt a little bitter in her heart. She took the comb and gently removed the golden princess crown from Qin Yin's hair and placed it to the side. Instantly, Qin Yin's beautiful hair fell down. Lin Muyu gently stroked her long hair, combing it over and over again. She raised her head and looked at Qin Yin's beautiful face in the mirror. Qin Yin was also looking at her. Qin Yin looked at the mirror and did not say a word. Tears flowed down her face. Don't cry. Everything will get better. Lin Muyu murmured. Qin Yin held Lin Muyu's hand and buried her face in his chest. She cried, No, this country has really collapsed. Just like the name of the continent, the 9 cauldrons have been destroyed. There is no longer an imperial family. Lin Muyu calmly caressed the side of Qin Yin's face and said, Xiao Yin, don't cry. Xiao Yin, don't cry. Qin Yin cried even more fiercely. She turned around and hugged Lin Muyu. Her voice trembled as she said, I don't want the empire, but I want this family. I want father to come back. I want brother Yu to be by my side. Why do I have to bear all of this? Lin Muyu smiled slightly. Xiao Yin, it's okay. Father and I will come back. No, Qin Yin bit her red lips and tears filled her eyes. I have been having the same dream every night. In the dream, father told me that I must be strong and live on. I know. Father might really be gone, but I must make Feng Jixing go to Tianming Mountain. Brother Yu, forgive me, forgive Xiao Yin for being stubborn this time. Yes, I know. Lin Muyu's body trembled slightly. A piercing pain came from the wound on his arm. He lowered his head to look at Qin Yin and said, everything will be fine. Xiao Yin, wipe away your tears. I haven't finished combing your hair. Qin Yin sobbed softly. She looked at herself and Lin Muyu in the mirror. It was like a big brother was dressing his little sister and waiting for her to get married. However, this scene seemed to be on the verge of shattering. This was the last time it would happen. After combing her hair, Qin Yin coiled her own hair and inserted an exquisite golden crown. She regained some of her princess-like demeanor. She stood up and turned to look at Lin Muyu, saying, regardless of success or failure, you must come back alive to see me. Don't worry. I will. Lin Muyu turned to look outside and said, there's not much time left. I have to go. After watching Lin Muyu walk out of the side hall, Qin Yin couldn't help but sob again. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzz. I love you. You must come back alive to see me. Outside the main hall, Wei Chou and Xiahou Sang led a group of royal guards and royal guards, waiting for Lin Muyu's orders. They hadn't slept the entire night, but their fighting spirit was still high. Commander, are we leaving? Wei Chou asked. Lin Muyu nodded. Yes, but this time, I can't guarantee that I can bring you back alive. Wei Chou smiled. Commander, don't worry. We can come back by ourselves. That's good. Let's go. Yes. On the northern city wall, the city wall was suffering from heavy attacks from the catapults. A large portion of the city wall had already collapsed. Zhang Wei was leading a group of people to repair it. At the same time, the streets of the city were densely packed with the Imperial Army's heavy cavalry, shield-bearers, pikemen, archers, etc. Over the past few days, more than 10,000 Imperial Army soldiers had died in battle, but Feng Jixing still managed to gather together an army of 30,000. You're here? Feng Jixing carried his wind-chopping saber and rode his horse over with a smile. He said, this bunch of bastard volunteers have destroyed another section of the city wall. Damn it. We are preparing to set off. Lin Muyu looked at the sparse guards in the city and said, Brother Feng, leave Zhang Wei and 1,000 Imperial guards here. I'm worried that the city will really fall, and Xiao Yin will have too few people by her side. All right. Feng Jixing turned and said, Zhang Wei, lead the brothers of the 1st Battalion to stay and defend the city. Zhang Wei cupped his fists. Yes, Commander. Open the gates. The iron gates slowly opened, and 30,000 Imperial guards welcomed the rain of spears and swords as they charged towards the densely packed volunteers outside the city. Facing an opponent several times their size, not a single one of them revealed a trace of fear. At this time, Qihai City. In the depths of the Duke's mansion, in an exquisite and elegant courtyard room, a bang sound was heard as a hole was punched through the door. Tang Xiaoxi's beautiful face appeared behind the hole and said, Let me out, Grandpa, you can't do this. Tang Lan leaned on her walking stick and turned shakily to look at Tang Xiaoxi, saying, Xiaoxi, why can't you understand grandfather's painstaking efforts? What painstaking efforts? Tang Xiaoxi said angrily, You're obviously greedy for life and afraid of death. You're an important official of the empire, a duke of a region, but you're afraid of death and don't dare to send troops. I've seen through. Grandfather is no longer the great general who followed the previous emperor to war. What did you say? Tang Lan was slightly angered, saying, Don't you understand? This is a brotherly dispute between Qin Jin and Qin Yi. It's best for our Qihai city not to get involved. Besides, Qin Jin's godson, Lin Muyu, killed your older brother, Tang Bin. I will never forget this grudge. You should also remember that Lin Muyu is an enemy of the Tang family. We shouldn't save him. He killed my cousin in order to save me. How many times do I have to tell you before you understand? Tang Xiaoxi looked at him with teary eyes and said, Grandfather, I don't care about your concealing techniques. Xiao Shi only knows that Xiao Yin and Mu are the most important people to me. I can't lose them. If grandfather doesn't save them, Xiaoxi will go myself. You're crazy, Xiaoxi. A middle-aged man berated. Is this how you talk to your grandfather? Second uncle, you're just a coward who's afraid of death. Tang Xiaoxi suddenly laughed and said while crying, the imperial capital is surrounded. The imperial guards and the Flying Mount Battalion are fighting to the death. They only have tens of thousands of people. Our Qihai city has close to 200,000 soldiers, but we're just watching from the sidelines. Is Qihai city still a city of the Qin Empire? If you guys aren't going, Tang Xiaoxi, will go alone. Tang Lan shouted, Xiaoxi, are you crazy? However, at this moment, flames suddenly rose from the small house. Tang Xiaoxi gritted her teeth and spread out 9 dancing flame tails behind her. She said, you guys can't trap me. Boom. The soul-suppressing seal soared into the sky and destroyed the house. Tang Xiaoxi leaped up and lay on the roof like a beautiful little fox. With a leap, she disappeared from Tang Lan's sight. Heavens, this crazy girl. Tang Lan gritted her teeth. Send someone to find Xiaoxi immediately. We must bring her back. The middle-aged man said, but father, the envoy from Iha Nation is still waiting in the living room. What should we do? Tang Lan said indifferently, let him go. Tell him to tell Qin Yi that there will be a war between Qihai province and Iha Nation. Tell Qin Yi to wash his neck and wait for Qihai city's butcher knife. Oh yes, that person? Have you found him? Yes, he has been arranged to stay in the post house in the city. It's a secret for now. Treat him well and don't neglect him. He's a rare exceptional general. Yes, don't worry, father. Chapter 300. Outside Lanyan City, 30,000 imperial guards led the charge to break out of the encirclement. Feng Jixing held his long blade and rode his horse to the front of the formation. The purple electric flame wolf martial soul was entrenched around him, as though there was no one around. Lin Muyu led Wei Qiu, Xiahou Sang, and the rest of the Eagle Nest camp's armored soldiers and followed the imperial guards to kill their way through. After breaking through 7 to 8 obstructing shield formations, the front was actually empty. The Iha country's army moved to the sides like a tide, as though they were afraid, but it was more like they were deliberately avoiding the enemy. What's going on? Feng Jixing held his bloody long saber and said through gritted teeth, Long Qianlin wants to let the imperial guards break out of the encirclement on purpose? Lin Muyu lowered her sword, grabbed Judy's reins, and galloped all the way. She said with a serious expression, Big brother Feng, something is wrong. We can't break out of the encirclement so easily. The Iha Nation's army isn't that weak. There must be a trap. Feng Jixing nodded, I know, but we still have to go to Heaven's Causeway Mountain. You must be careful. Lin Muyu frowned, Heaven's Causeway Mountain is most likely a trap. You must be extra careful. The Iha Nation's people are hypocritical and cunning. If it's not absolutely necessary, don't go to Heaven's Causeway Mountain. Feng Jixing nodded and said with a smile, You must also be careful. Long Qianlin must have already noticed Dragon Rocky Mountain, and it's most likely surrounded now. I know. Let's part ways here. Okay. Lin Muyu suddenly pulled the reins, and Judy let out a long neigh. He took his master to the northeast, while Wei Qiu, Xiahou Sang, and the other soldiers of the Eagle Nest camp followed. Feng Jixing shouted, and led the 30,000 imperial guards eastward towards Heaven's Causeway Mountain. The Eagle's Nest camp was made up entirely of cavalry. They moved at lightning speed. After 4 hours, they could already see Dragon Rocky Mountain in the distance. Just as Feng Jixing had expected, the flags of the Iha Nation were flying at the foot of Dragon Rocky Mountain. This place was surrounded. However, there were not many soldiers surrounding the mountain, no more than 20,000 at most. With the remaining 15,000 soldiers in the Longdan army camp, it would definitely not be a problem for them to rush out. A messenger bird. Lin Muyu turned around and said. Wei Qiu immediately took the cage from the side of the horse and handed the messenger bird to Lin Muyu. Lin Muyu quickly wrote a line of words, Luo Yu, I have led the Eagle Nest camp to the west of Dragon Rocky Mountain to provide support. You will lead all the troops of the Longdan army camp down the mountain and follow me back to the imperial capital. Lin Muyu, whoosh! The bird flapped its wings and flew high into the sky. Like a sharp white arrow, it shot towards the towering Dragon Rocky Mountain. Not long after, the sound of drums on the mountain did not stop. Countless flags of the Longdan army camp could be faintly seen flying in the air. There were also some families' purple flower flags among them. It seemed that Luo Yu had already regarded the Longdan army camp as one of the many armies of the empire. They are charging down the mountain, Xiahou Sang said with a slightly excited smile. Lin Muyu nodded. Let's go, we will charge in from the periphery. We will coordinate from the inside and the outside to welcome the Longdan army camp down the mountain. After returning the dragon spirit sword to its sheath, Lin Muyu directly held the pear blossom spear and charged forward. Under the tactics of cavalry, the spear was naturally more lethal. As the saying went, an inch longer was an inch stronger. Moreover, the pear blossom spear was cold and sharp. It was very suitable for charging on horseback. Immediately, the hundreds of people from the Eagle Nest camp, led by Lin Muyu, charged into the Iha Nation's camp from the back like tigers entering a flock of sheep. Xiahou Sang's broadsword directly chopped off the head of a volunteer soldier. He swept his gaze around and shouted, "Commander, the ones surrounding the mountain are the troops of Swift White Province's Sunset City. Count Xiang Manning is already an old thing, yet he still dares to come to the northern ridge to mess with us. He is simply an old bastard. Kill them all." Count Xiang Manning? Lin Muyu frowned. At the same time, she also realized that the volunteer soldiers in front of her were indeed on the weak side. The soldiers seemed to have been out of battle formation for a long time. Faced with the Imperial Guards and Royal Army's attacks, they did not even have the slightest bit of strength to fight back. Just like that, she and her people killed their way into the depths of the camp. After Wei Chou shot the vanguard general with one arrow, the more than 10,000 volunteer soldiers lost their leader and completely became a target for slaughter. On the mountain, the Longdan army camp roared down. Luo Yu and Fengxi rushed at the front of the crowd. How could the Sunset City army possibly withstand the elite heavy cavalry? In the blink of an eye, they tore through the encirclement. The powerful battle formation of the Longdan army camp directly caused the Iha Nation's army to be frightened out of their wits. Their flags fluttered, and they collapsed without a fight. Seeing the Iha Nation's army retreat like the tide, Luo Yu continued to ride forward. She found Lin Muyu in the crowd, cupped her fists, and said, "Madam, should we chase after them?" "No need." Lin Muyu shook her head. "This volunteer army is not worthy of being our opponent. Follow me back to Lanyan City immediately." "We are needed there." "Yes." Turning their horses around, the 15,000 elites of the Longdan army camp led by Lin Muyu and Luo Yu charged straight for Lanyan City. The sound of hooves was earth-shattering. It was as if this army had become Lanyan City's only hope. However, Lin Muyu did not know that Lanyan City had already reached a point of no return. Boom! The city wall collapsed by another 20 meters. Zhang Wei, who was standing on the city wall, was dumbfounded. He watched as more than a dozen Imperial Guards fell into the rubble and were smashed into a pile of minced meat. The long saber in his hand was still trembling, and his face was ashen. He said, "Repair the city wall immediately. Archers, shoot. Don't stop. The moment we stop, the Iha Nation barbarians outside will kill their way in. Guard the city gate and organize the shield formation below the city wall." A chilly arch of the Imperial Guards looked at Zhang Wei with a pale face and said, "General Zhang, the Imperial Guards have suffered heavy losses. We don't have more people to organize the shield formation to protect the city gate." "I don't care." Zhang Wei roared angrily. "Even if I have to find all the prostitutes in Lanyan City, you have to organize a shield formation of 100 people to protect the city gate. Go. Someone, send a message to Zetian Palace and ask General Qin Lei to send the Imperial Guards to reinforce the North Gate. The barbarians outside the North Gate are attacking like crazy." Heavens. Yes, General. Tongtian Street was bustling with people. They knew their fate on the day the city was breached. So many of them had already prepared their carriages. They were prepared to rush out and escape once the city gate was breached. They could not wait for death in the city. This made it even more difficult for the troops guarding the city to advance. In the distance, golden-purple Yinhua flags could be seen waving in the crowd. Get out of the way! An angry roar exploded in the crowd like a muffled thunder. It was Qin Lei, the commander of the royal guards. He was dressed in golden armor and carried the thunder-split blade. He personally led the dragon guards and tiger guards to kill their way over. In the crowd was a young girl wearing a king's crown. It was Qin Yin. Qin Yin had also personally come to defend the city. Zhang Wei hurriedly flew down the city wall and bowed respectfully. Your Highness, you really shouldn't have come to the city gate. It's too dangerous here. The southern barbarians of Iha Nation are attacking like crazy. We can't defend the north gate for much longer. No, we must defend it. Qin Yin raised her hand and pulled out the purple Yinhua sword. She shouted, as long as the city lives, we live. If the city dies, we die. The soldiers' morale was immediately boosted by the princess's arrival. Many people even rushed up the city wall and shouted, "Who can give me a sword? I also want to fight for the empire." Behind Qin Yin, a group of generals and civil officials shouted, "Your Highness, be careful. You are the only bloodline of the empire. You can't come to such a dangerous place. Hurry and return to Zetian Palace with us." Qin Yin did not care so much. With a few leaps, she landed on the city wall. In the distance, a scaling ladder was rapidly approaching the city wall. The volunteer soldiers on the scaling ladder aimed at Qin Yin, the general who was wearing the clothes of the empire's royal family. They raised their hands and shot a round of arrows. Qin Yin held the purple Yinhua sword horizontally in front of her chest. She lightly shook it. Suddenly, the purple Yinhua sword let out a sharp sword cry. It turned into a sound wave and attacked. 3 volunteer soldiers fell from the ladder. Qin Yin stomped on the bricks of the city wall with her small boots. 6 golden god-binding chains protected her body. She jumped on the ladder and the sword light flashed continuously. 4 volunteer soldiers fell to the ground and died. Whoosh! When she jumped back to the city wall, a few arrows behind her pierced into the wall. Qin Yin couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. This was war, not a game. She could die at any time. At the foot of the city, a group of volunteer soldiers had already recognized this beautiful girl. Their faces were filled with hatred as they shouted, "She's Qin Yin, it's her? This ugly woman has oppressed the world and preys on the people. She's our enemy. Shoot her quickly." Whoosh, 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 countless arrows flew over. Zhang Wei hurriedly raised his hand and snatched a shield in front of Qin Yin. The arrows landed on the wooden shield with a pa-pa-pa sound. Suddenly, he felt his body heat up. With a wang sound, a huge fire cauldron appeared on the city wall. It was Choo-Choo. Fire cauldron Choo-Choo spun around on top of the city wall and lightly raised his palm. Boom! A huge palm print landed on the battlefield outside the city, instantly killing a dozen volunteer soldiers and turning them into a pile of ashes. Choo-Choo turned to Qin Yin and said, "Your Highness, your life is related to the survival of the world. Please follow me back to Zetian Palace." Qin Yin gasped for breath and nodded, "Yes, Choo-Choo." At this moment, a heavy cavalry of the imperial army galloped over from afar. With a pale face, he shouted, "Not good, not good. The east gate has been breached." "What happened?" Zhang Wei said angrily, "The east gate is so sturdy, how could it be broken?" The imperial guard's face was ashen as he said, "A god. A god has descended." With just one palm, he shattered the entire east gate. "Oh my god, a god." Zhang Wei felt a chill in his heart. Choo-Choo's face also turned pale and said, "Qin Lei, protect Her Highness. Go around the main road through the alley and prepare to break through the east gate. As long as Her Highness is alive, the Empire still has hope." Qin Lei cupped his fists and said, "Yes, Sir Choo-Choo." Chu Chu looked at the generals in the crowd and said, Commander Chu Huaying, lead the Flying Mount Battalion out of the city to face Long Qianlin's main force. Only by delaying his main force outside the North Gate can Her Highness have a chance of breaking through. Chu Huaying cupped his fists and looked at Chu Chu. His eyes were filled with determination. Even if we die in battle, we will definitely delay Long Qianlin. Chu Chu gave him a deep look. He felt a little bitter in his heart. After a few seconds, he said, You are the pride of the empire. Chapter 301. Boom! Another section of the city wall collapsed, and the volunteer soldiers swarmed in. Not to mention the East Gate, even the North Gate in front of them was in danger. Chu Chu and Qin Lei protected Qin Yin together as they retreated from Zetian Palace Hall. The defeat of Lanyan City was inevitable. The Qin Empire had been around for more than 7,000 years. Finally, on this day, the fate of this ancient empire had come to an end. The war drums thundered, and the imperial guards, whose faces were covered with blood, carried the war drums to the city wall. They beat the war drums with all their might and cheered for the Flying Mount Battalion, which was streaming out of the city. Chu Huayin's armor was stained with blood, and his face looked tired. At this moment, the light of dawn fell on his face, making him look exceptionally handsome. With his hand on the hilt of his sword, Chu Huayin walked at the front of the Flying Mount Battalion. With an arrogant look on his face, he looked at the volunteer soldiers who were in formation outside the North Gate of Lanyan City from afar. This volunteer soldier used to be the private army of Qin Yi, the Prince of Zhenan. It was an elite army from Bailing City, one of the 7 famous cities of the empire. At this moment, there were only 150,000 soldiers left. It was precisely because of the existence of this army that led to the defeat of Lanyan City. The Flying Mount Battalion was one of the only remaining corps of the empire. At this moment, there were more than 5,000 soldiers left, and the former commander of the Flying Mount Battalion was Long Qianlin. At this moment, Long Qianlin had become the commander of this volunteer soldier in front of them. History repeated itself again and again, just like a reincarnation. Long Qianlin knew the art of battle formations very well, so he only sent 1/3 of the troops. 50,000 soldiers lined up on the plain, and all of them were armed with spears and shields. They formed 7 circular battle formations, surrounding and protecting each other. Their spears pierced through the gaps between the shields. This was a battle tactic specially created to deal with cavalry. Among the crowd, Long Qianlin spurred his horse forward. With a slightly proud expression on his face, he cupped his fists and said, Commander Chu Huayin, you are one of the 4 heroes of Lanyan, and also Lin Muyu's brother. Qianlin pays his respects to you. If Commander Chu is willing to surrender, with your ability, Prince Zhenan will at least give you the title of Earl or Marquis. Why do you need to risk your life for the decadent and heartless empire? Chu Huairen slowly unsheathed his sharp sword and said calmly, I have to bear the burdens of the ruler. His Majesty Qin Jin has bestowed me with great honor. Today I, Chu Huairen, will use my life to protect his daughter, as well as the 5 million citizens of Lanyan City behind me. Long Qianlin sneered, Bring it on then. Chu Huayin turned his horse around and looked at the Flying Mount Battalion behind him. He said loudly, I know that all of you used to be in the army of 5 Valleys City and also Long Qianlin's army. But today, all of you are soldiers of the empire. It is a soldier's duty to protect the country. For the sake of the 5 million people of Lanyan City behind you, charge forward with me. Even if our corpses are buried in the ground, the soil under our feet will remember us. The mountains and rivers will remember us. The cavalrymen of the Flying Mount Battalion raised their weapons. Their faces were filled with hatred and anger. The sound of hooves gradually became more intense. The 5,000 cavalrymen were like a sharp blade that collided with the shield formation. In an instant, blood and flesh were all over the place. The first rays of the morning sun shone on Chu Huairen's face, but the cloak behind him fluttered. It was as if he was flying higher and higher, just like his dream. Yao, the moment Chu Huairen's sword tore apart the neck of a volunteer soldier, he laughed. I'm not a competent brother, but I'm a competent soldier of the Empire. Be proud of your brother. Outside the main battlefield, groups of volunteer soldiers had already killed their way into the city from the east and north gates. According to Marshal Ji Yao's order, massacre the entire city. These volunteer soldiers killed anyone they saw after entering the city. They were like ferocious beasts that devoured the lives in Lanyan City. At this moment, among the fleeing commoners, a young lady carrying a harp and her maid could be seen. There were also a few guards wearing the uniform of the Divine Might Battalion. They were moving against the flow of the crowd and heading straight for the north city wall. Zhang Wei was holding a long saber and riding his horse as he commanded the imperial guards to retreat. His gaze swept across the crowd and he hurriedly flew over. He said respectfully, "Miss Xianxiang, the city gate has been breached. Why are you still here? Leave quickly and follow the commoners out of the city. That's our only hope." Xianxiang was carrying a harp, but she shook her head with a smile and said, "General Zhang Wei, you should leave quickly. I want to finish the last part of my journey with him on this ruined city wall." Zhang Wei's body trembled. His eyes were red as he cupped his fists and said, "The Empire has let you down and also let him down." Xianxiang smiled. "Thank you for your understanding, General. Go quickly and save more people." "Yes." Zhang Wei spurred his horse away while Xianxiang carried the harp and walked on the blood-stained stone steps. Step by step, she arrived at the ruined city wall. She slowly put down the harp on the broken wall where the battlements had fallen. She knelt on the blood-stained city wall and looked at the flying mount camp and the volunteer soldiers who were fighting in the distance. She knew that her beloved was dutifully doing his duty among the crowd. "Xiaoyu, burn the Qilin incense for me. Then you should escape too," Xianxiang muttered. The maid was startled. Tears flowed from her eyes as she said, Miss, Xiaoyu won't leave. Xiaoyu wants to die with you." Xianxiang turned around and looked at her. Her face was filled with gentleness as she said, "You're still young. You haven't met anyone worthy of your love. Your life is still very long. As for me, the person I love is right there. My love will vanish along with him. Once Chu Huai dies, what's the point of Xianxiang living on?" Xiaoyu cried like a pear blossom in the rain, Miss, burn the incense and leave. Be obedient." "Yes, miss." Xiaoyu lit an incense burner. The purple incense was very strange. Wisps of it lingered around Xianxiang's body. Xiaoyu cried even more fiercely, "Miss." Xianxiang gently pulled on the strings of the zither and arranged them one by one. She lowered her head as her tears dripped onto the zither. She held back her sobs as she said, "We live together, and we die together. Xianxiang was born with love, so I have no regrets even if I die." Xiaoyu cried as she retreated a few steps. She said, "If there's a next life, I hope that Miss can stay with Commander Chu for the rest of your life. You don't have to suffer the pain of being separated by heaven and earth anymore. Xiaoyu is leaving now." As she spoke, Xiaoyu leaped up and landed silently under the rubble of the city like the morning sun. The guards looked at each other before cupping their fists and retreating. Xianxiang held back her tears as she looked at the crowd that was fighting below the city wall. She heard Chu Huai's voice and saw the resplendent lights of the star-plucking finger exploding in the crowd. No matter how sharp a sword was, it would not be able to sever the heart of love. The sound of the zither was filled with desolation. This was the first time Xianxiang had played the general zither. The sound of the zither was decisive, and it faintly carried the sound of a powerful army. It seemed to resonate with the battle below the city wall. On the battlefield, Chu Huaiyin's body was riddled with wounds. Even the warhorse he was riding on was riddled with arrows. But as the warhorse galloped, Chu Huaiyin raised his sword again and again, slashing at the bodies of the righteous soldiers. This was like fate. The battle between Chu Huaiyin and Long Qianlin was fate. His love for Xianxiang was also fate. The melody on her fingertips trembled continuously. Xianxiang looked at the person she deeply loved from afar, and her face became increasingly pale. Blood flowed out from her nostrils and the corner of her mouth. The sound of the zither also seemed to weaken due to the passing of life. She forcefully opened her eyes, wanting to take one more look at Chu Huai, but her vision became increasingly blurry. Chu Huai roared angrily in the crowd. It sounded like the mournful cry of a dying beast. There weren't many soldiers from the Flying Mount Battalion around him anymore. The Flying Mount Battalion had already become history, just like Chu Huai. Bang! The glow of battle energy surged as Chu Huai's star-plucking finger exploded once again, turning a group of righteous soldiers into a pile of flesh and blood. However, at the same time, a sharp arrow pierced into his chest. Chu Huai howled in pain as he gripped the reins tightly. However, the warhorse that was riddled with wounds had also reached the end of its life, and it slowly knelt down. Chu Huai struggled to pick up his long sword. He looked towards the city wall and saw a familiar figure slowly lying on the zither. Blood flowed down his forehead and into his eyes. This brave and invincible commander of the empire howled in pain as his tears mixed with the blood. He wanted to look again, but he could no longer see anything. He could only swing his sword and slash at the crowd. Spears pierced Chu Huai's body one after another, but he didn't seem to feel any pain. He waved his long sword crazily, causing heads to fly off. The group of righteous soldiers were so shocked that they retreated one after another. No one dared to move forward anymore. This commander, who was famous for his talent and was one of the 4 heroes of Lanyan, was like a mad beast. The righteous soldiers formed a circle around Chu Huai, but no one dared to attack him. Chu Huai's body was pressed against the spears as he knelt there. His tears and blood continuously splashed onto the yellow soil. Suddenly, he reached into his clothes and used the last of his strength to take out a blood-stained ball. He said in a voice as soft as a mosquito, "Yao, brother is gone." Outside the battle formation, Wang Lin was riding on a warhorse. His body trembled slightly as he bowed his head in the direction of Chu Huai and said, "No one is allowed to touch Chu Huai's corpse. Do you understand?" "Yes, General." The group of generals cupped their fists. At this moment, a messenger suddenly galloped over and said loudly, "General, something bad has happened. Lin Muyu has led the Longdan army camp's men here. They will arrive at the battlefield in 5 minutes at most." "He's finally here." Wang Lin raised his hand slightly and said, "Block the north gate of Lanyan City with 20,000 men. Let Lin Muyu and the Longdan army camp enter with the remaining 100,000 men. Surround them. This is a battle of annihilation." A general asked, "General, you want to kill Lin Muyu?" Wang Lin's eyes flickered as he said, "If you kill someone's elder brother and they have the ability to kill you, will you spare their life?" "I understand." The group of volunteer soldiers slowly dispersed as the Longdan army camp entered. Lin Muyu rode on his warhorse and ignored the volunteer soldiers who were surrounding him. He headed straight for the center of the battlefield and saw countless corpses in the distance. The Empire's purple Yinhua flag was scattered all over the ground. There was a person kneeling at the spot where the most corpses were piled up. His blood-stained commander's cloak fluttered gently in the wind. That was Chu Huai. Lin Muyu felt as if his heart had been pierced by thousands of arrows. His body swayed and he fell to the ground. He scrambled to his feet and stumbled all the way to Chu Huai's corpse. He hugged his ice-cold body and almost couldn't cry. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he hugged Chu Huai's body tightly. He cried out sorrowfully, as if he was a wild beast that had lost its loved one. Chapter 302. Plop. The exquisite ball, which was covered in blood, fell to the ground. Lin Muyu looked at it, and his heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. He gently picked up the exquisite ball and stuffed it into his clothes. He raised his hand and tore off his holy temple cloak, instantly tearing it into strips. He mounted his horse and tied Chu Huai's corpse behind him. Tears flowed down his cheeks as he pulled out the pear blossom spear that was stabbed into the side of his horse. He muttered, "Revenge!" Luo Yu, Wei Chou, and the others pulled out their weapons one after another. Their faces were filled with anger and hatred as they shouted, "Revenge! Revenge!" At this time, Wang Lin had already finished setting up the battle formation. The Yihe nation's army was all around them. Long Qianlin had 150,000 elite soldiers, and 10,000 of them had been killed by Chu Huayin. There were still 140,000 of them left. His military strength was definitely above that of the Longdan army camp. However, Long Qianlin didn't dare to be careless, because the person commanding the Longdan army camp was Lin Muyu. She was the opponent he feared the most in his life. Cavalry, move out. The Yiyong army finally mobilized the Lingnan heavy cavalry. About 30,000 of them slowly moved out of the formation, facing off with the flying geese formation. They were ready to attack at any time. Luo Yu raised her spear high and shouted, "Regroup the front line, cone formation." Long Qianlin was too arrogant. He actually wanted to use the flying geese formation to take over the Longdan army camp. However, it wasn't going to be that easy. Everyone in the Longdan army camp was equipped with shields and armor. It wasn't going to be that easy to take them down. Charge! Lin Muyu acted as the sharp blade of the cone formation. She patted her horse and galloped forward. The sound of the horse's hooves could be heard behind her as she charged towards the opponent's flying geese formation. Just as the two sides were about to collide, the soldiers of the Brave Dragon Battalion took out their longbows and shot a round of arrows. Furthermore, they were using white diamond arrowheads. The white diamond was so sharp that it could penetrate a 10-centimeter thick steel plate. How could the Lingnan cavalry's armor withstand it? Puff, 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 puff. Blood splattered everywhere. One round of arrow rain was enough to injure or kill thousands of Lingnan cavalrymen. This kind of loss was nothing much, but the corpses of the cavalrymen quickly became obstacles for their comrades at the back. When they collided with each other, the losses were hard to calculate. What was worse was that the Courage Dragon Battalion was charging towards them. The group of people led by Lin Muyu suddenly thrust their spears forward. Amidst the violent collision, the two heavy cavalry clashed head-on. In an instant, it was clear who had the upper hand. Lin Muyu's expensive equipment showed her advantage. She killed the Lingnan cavalry with a single charge. After nearly 20 minutes of charging, both sides changed their positions and regrouped their formation. They were ready to attack again. However, the Lingnan cavalry had lost almost 5,000 men. On the other hand, the Longdan army camp had lost less than 1,000 men. Bastard! Long Qianlin clenched his fist and said coldly, "What kind of arrowhead is that? It can actually pierce through our steel shields." Lin Muyu is just too terrifying. A military officer cupped his fist and said, "General, do you want me to send someone to fetch an arrowhead for us to take a look?" "There's no need. Don't disturb the battlefield." He hesitated for a moment and said, But our heavy cavalry is clearly not a match for the Longdan army camp. If we continue to fight them head-on, I'm afraid we'll suffer a great loss." Long Qianlin raised his eyebrows and said, "If we can use 30,000 heavy cavalry to exchange for the 10,000 Longdan army camp, then this deal will be too profitable." Yes. However, everything was not as Long Qianlin had imagined. After fighting for more than 2 hours, only a few of Lingnan's 30,000 heavy cavalry were left. At most, there were only 2,000 injured soldiers left. However, there were still more than 8,000 people from the Longdan army camp standing proudly on the battlefield. Lin Muyu, Wei Chou, Luo Yu and the rest were already covered in blood. No one knew how many people they had killed. They only knew that their comrades were decreasing one by one. The pear blossom spear seemed to have been bathed in blood. Even the handle that was holding it was a little slippery. Lin Muyu lightly shook her arm. Immediately, the pear blossom spear buzzed loudly and shook off all the blood. Looking at the volunteer army camp in the distance, Lin Muyu slowly raised her arm and pointed the pear blossom spear at them. She smiled and said, "Follow me and attack their volunteer army camp." The Longdan army camp did not wait for the enemy to reorganize their formation and launch their attack. There was no place for modesty on the battlefield. Lin Muyu understood the principle of not missing an opportunity. She would not give Long Qianlin any time to catch his breath. "Oh no, they aren't even resting before charging," said a military officer with a pale face in the middle of the volunteer army. Long Qianlin immediately waved his hand and said in a low voice, Order them to immediately reorganize the heaven and earth formation and block the Longdan army camp. A group of archers, pikemen, and shield-bearers formed a circular battle formation and attacked rapidly. It was this battle formation that defeated Chu Huayin's flying mount camp. Now, Long Qianlin was using the same tactic again. It seemed like he wanted Lin Muyu to end up like Chu Huayin. Not only that, he swept his gaze across the crowd and cupped his fists. Lord Kobin, please come out and help us kill Lin Muyu. Among the crowd, a middle-aged general who seemed to be in his 50s rode out of the formation. His face was expressionless, but when he frowned, an invisible aura descended on the surroundings, causing Long Qianlin and the others to feel a boundless pressure. This was the domain of a Saint Realm expert. This Kobin was one of the Saint Realm experts that Luolan had brought down from the Sacred Peak. Currently, he was under Long Qianlin's command. As soon as Kobin came out of the battle formation, it seemed like all the Iha Nation soldiers were excited. Lin Muyu and the others naturally did not know about Kobin's existence. In the midst of a chaotic battle, how could Lin Muyu be distracted to use the spiritual pulse technique? The pear blossom spear in her hand was stained with blood again. Facing the heaven and earth formation, Lin Muyu decisively ordered the white diamond arrows to open up a path. After shooting the shield bearers on the periphery, they charged straight in and used the heavy armor of the Longdan army camp to block the arrows. At the same time, they trampled with their iron hooves, instantly destroying the heaven and earth formation formed by 5,000 people. Continue, follow me and charge forward. The army collided with the second heaven and earth formation. Lin Muyu took the lead, waved her iron fist, and directly punched out with chaos of the common people. With a bang, more than 10 shield bearers were sent flying and turned into blood. Behind her, Wei Chou shot an arrow and killed captaincy in the formation. Then, the Longdan army camp charged straight in and was about to destroy the second heaven and earth formation. Long Qianlin narrowed his eyes and watched from afar. His palms were drenched in sweat as he said faintly, "Lin Muyu, I want to see how you're going to defend against a saint. If you die in battle, I'll collect your corpse. I won't let you suffer any humiliation. You're the same as Chu Huaying, a respectable soldier of the empire. You're the pride of this land." In the battle formation, a person suddenly broke through the wind. It was Kobin. Kobin held a long saber in his hand and attacked from the right side. The handle of the saber swept diagonally, and the power of the sanctuary surged. Immediately, the heads of 5 soldiers in the Longdan army camp flew into the air. Some of them even had their helmets cut off. After this attack, Kobin roared and punched forward with his iron fist. Suddenly, the space was slightly distorted. In the next moment, with a bang, more than 10 soldiers in the Longdan army camp were all swallowed by the flames. The flames in the battle formation soared into the sky. This was the cultivation of a sanctuary expert. "It's a sanctuary," Wei Chou shouted. "Men, come with me and kill them." "No, you stay." Lin Muyu looked at Wei Chou from afar and gestured for him to stop. She said, "Everyone, change your bows and arrows. Let's kill this sanctuary expert first. I'll distract him." With that, Lin Muyu turned over and dismounted from the horse. She used the falling star steps and moved faster than the horse. The pear blossom spear was already hanging on the horse's back, but she raised her hand and pulled out the dragon spirit sword. She attacked from behind Kobin. With a roar, the fire in her palm was dense, and she directly used a spiral break that was infused with the true dragon essential fire. At the same time, with a swoosh in the air, the invisible demonic noise saber also flew out. "Die!" In the crowd, Kobin brazenly punched the heart of a soldier in the Longdan army camp, but he also felt the strong flame energy behind him. He quickly turned around and saw Lin Muyu. He couldn't help but laugh. "Second heaven of the heaven realm? You'll still die." He spurred his horse forward, his eyes filled with killing intent. Suddenly, his aura rose, and the surrounding time seemed to freeze. Suddenly, everyone couldn't move, and an invisible aura controlled everything. "Ha!" Kobin laughed maniacally as he charged toward Lin Muyu. His fists were covered in scorching flames, and he blasted the dragon flame spiral break aside before unleashing another punch that struck the wall of her golden gourd. Bam! Lin Muyu was completely immobilized within the domain, and she threw up a mouthful of blood as she flew back a few steps. However, right at this moment, Wei Chou and the others, who were over 100 meters away, weren't within the domain. He raised his demon-devouring bow, and an arrow flew through the air before striking Ko Bin's suit of battle armor. The arrow penetrated about 3 centimeters into the suit of battle armor, and Ko Bin hurriedly stumbled back a few steps with an astonished expression on his face. How is this possible? His aura was thrown into disarray, and his domain also disappeared. Lin Muyu spun around and landed firmly on the ground. Her battle boots shone with a golden light as she stomped on the ground. Swoosh, 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 golden gourd vines rose from the ground and bound Ko Bin tightly, not giving him any chance to break free from the gourd vines. Xiahou Sang, Luo Yu, and the rest all took out their bows and arrows and released them. In an instant, Ko Bin had turned into a porcupine. Crack! An invisible demonic noise saber flew through the air, slicing through Ko Bin's head as well as the gourd vines. A Saint Domain powerful being had just died in the midst of a chaotic battle, and that seemed to further reinforce the saying that 2 fists were no match for 4 hands, let alone the elite Longdan army camp. Ko Bin had underestimated his opponent far too much. After getting onto her steed, Lin Muyu's expression became even more resentful as she yelled, "Continue to charge!" The morale of the Iha Nation soldiers was also shaken by Ko Bin's death. Long Qianlin was completely flabbergasted, and he couldn't help but mutter, "How is this possible?" "Great General, should we retreat our command camp?" one of the generals suggested. Long Qianlin gritted his teeth in response. "No, switch from defense to offense. Gather our forces and hold off the Longdan army camp." Chapter 303. Mount Heaven's Causeway was a solitary peak that towered between heaven and earth. When Feng Jixing arrived at Mount Heaven's Causeway with 30,000 Imperial guards, there was no trace of the Imperial flag. Instead, Mount Heaven's Causeway was surrounded by the Tianshu province army that had changed their flag. 80,000 Tianshu soldiers were camped at the foot of Mount Heaven's Causeway, and their leader was Yuqi Tian, the head of the Yuqi family. However, the Tianshu army was no longer wearing the insignia of the empire. Instead, they were wearing the insignia of the Iha nation. Yuqi Tian had committed treason. Tuck, tuck, tuck. It was the envoy of the Tianshu army. He held a white flag in his hand and had an arrogant look on his face. When he arrived in front of the imperial army, he laughed out loud and said, "I, Li Tong, the Heavenly Corps Army adjunct, pay my respects to the commander of the imperial army, Lord Feng Jixing. You are an outstanding man, so you should understand the meaning of obeying the will of the heavens. The 80,000 soldiers of the Tianshu army have surrendered to the Iha nation. Together with the 50,000 reinforcements from Lingnan, there are 130,000 soldiers waiting for you, Lord Feng Jixing. His Highness, the Southern Guardian King, has said that as long as you are willing to surrender to the Iha nation, he will confer you the title of Northern Guardian King. What do you think, Lord?" Feng Jixing sat on his warhorse with a tired expression. He looked at Li Tong indifferently until he saw that Li Tong was a little ill at ease. "Lord, why are you looking at me like that?" Feng Jixing smiled. "I want to see what a dog's face looks like." Li Tong said angrily, "Feng Jixing, don't think that you're so great just because you're the commander of the Imperial Guards. Let me tell you, the empire is finished. From now on, it will be the Iha nation's world. You, Feng Jixing, are nothing more than a dog of the empire. Commander Yuqi Tian sent me here to negotiate with you because he thinks highly of you, Feng Jixing. Otherwise, my 130,000 soldiers would be able to destroy your mere 30,000. Then let him destroy us." Feng Jixing suddenly pulled out his saber and directly chopped off Li Tong's head. Blood splattered far away, but none of the surrounding imperial army generals dodged, allowing the blood to splatter on their bodies. This way, no one will be able to report back to Yuqi Tian and have him destroy us, Luo Lai said indifferently. Feng Jixing smiled. Don't worry. I'm sure that old dog Yuqi Tian will understand what I mean. What now? His Majesty has been murdered. Feng Jixing murmured, let's retreat. Retreat towards the direction of the imperial capital. Retreat as we fight. But I don't know if I can bring you all back to the imperial capital alive. We will follow the commander without any regrets even if we die, Luo Lai said with a smile. When Feng Jixing and the others turned around to retreat, the sound of war drums could be heard from behind them. The 80,000 soldiers from the Tian Shu army had already caught up and were charging over from all directions. Meanwhile, another group of Iha Nation's troops appeared in the forest on the side. It was the troops from Lincoln province. Feng Jixing's eyes turned cold as he said, don't continue fighting. Cavalry, switch to bows and long-range projectiles. Cover the infantry's retreat. Sounds of killing could be heard from all directions in the forest. In Lanyan City, dust was flying everywhere on the battlefield north of the city, but the battle was nearing its end. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on the battlefield, illuminating the pools of blood. After a whole day of fighting, the Longdan army camp had not been able to charge out of here, but the Iha Nation had paid an even heavier price. More than half of the 150,000 elite soldiers under Long Qianlin's command had been killed by the Flying Mount camp and the Longdan army camp in a single day. Chief General. An old general looked at the unbearable scene on the battlefield and said with a trembling voice, these Iha Nation soldiers are the Lingnan warriors who were raised by His Highness, the Prince of Jinan. Now, 90,000 of our 150,000 soldiers have died in battle. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for us to continue fighting. Otherwise, if His Highness investigates, I'm afraid that Chief General will not be able to absolve himself from the blame. No, we must kill everyone in the Longdan army camp. Long Qianlin looked at the battlefield with an ashen face and said, there are only slightly more than 1,000 soldiers left in the Longdan army camp. Only by killing them can it be considered a real victory. If we don't get rid of the Longdan army camp today, this troop will definitely be a huge problem for us in the future. The old general gritted his teeth and said, Chief General, His Highness gave you the military power so that you can fight for the Iha Nation. However, you seem to have placed the grudge between you and Lin Muyu in a more important position. If that's the case, I'm afraid I have to consider reporting to His Highness. Long Qianlin narrowed his eyes. The old general continued, I've also heard that it was Lin Muyu who saved your wife, Hu Xiaoyun, when you were in Five Valley City. I don't know if that's true. Since you're indebted to Lin Muyu, why are you so ruthless, Chief General? Long Qianlin laughed miserably and said, do you think that I don't want to let Lin Muyu go? However, do you know what kind of price we'll have to pay once Lin Muyu takes her revenge? I'm afraid it won't be as simple as tens of thousands of people. However, since you've said so, let's drop the matter for today. I don't want a hero like Lin Muyu to die on the battlefield. Men, sound the gongs to retreat and let Lin Muyu enter the city. Yes, General. The gongs sounded and the Iha Nation soldiers under Long Qianlin's command retreated like a receding tide, opening up a path to Lanyan City for the Longdan army camp. Lin Muyu was panting heavily. The fighting energy and physical strength in her body were almost depleted. Even the strength to hold the dragon spirit sword was strained. Beside her, Icatosaurus's red crystal scales were covered in blood. The little fellow was very happy after being released to help in the battle. However, it was so tired that it followed beside Lin Muyu like a reptile. Looking at Lanyan City in the distance, it had already changed. Xiao Yin, Lin Muyu murmured, but she didn't know if her beloved was still alive. Wei Chou, who was covered in blood, said calmly, Commander, they're massacring the city. Yes, Lin Muyu could see everything clearly. At this moment, Lanyan City was almost filled with the Iha Nation's troops. Under Marshal Ji Yao's Iron Order, the Iha Nation's army of more than 200,000 soldiers were massacring the citizens of Lanyan City. There was no resistance, only death and fear. Boom! Another section of the city wall collapsed, and a body fell from the broken wall. A Guqin and a woman were lying among the rubble. Lin Muyu's gaze swept across, and his heart couldn't help but ache. It was Xianxiang. He urged his horse forward and carried Xianxiang's body. He untied Chu Huang's body and handed them to the soldiers of the Longdan army camp behind him. Luo Yu, lead the Longdan army camp around the city and look for Her Highness Yin and Chu Yao. Once you find them, bring them far away. Wei Chou, Xiahou Sang, the two of you will bring the remaining imperial guards and follow me into the city. Also, bury Big Brother and Xianxiang together. Even if they can't be together in life, at least they can be together in death. Yes, my lord. There were only slightly more than 1,000 people left in the Longdan army camp. Lin Muyu really didn't want this army that he had raised with his own hands to die in the chaos. At least he wanted to leave a torch for the Longdan army camp and the empire. As night fell, the Longdan army camp disappeared into the night. Lin Muyu, Wei Chou, and Xiahou Sang brought more than a dozen imperial guards into the city. They could only hope that Qin Yin could successfully escape. However, it was easier said than done. The Yihe nation had sent countless soldiers and peerless masters to hunt down the empire's crown prince in the city. In the distance, there were howls on Tongtian Street. Countless commoners were banished to the streets. Then, they were killed by a group of brave soldiers carrying broadswords. The screams of young girls could be heard from the rubble on the side. The Yihe nation had conquered Lanyan City, so it was inevitable that they would abduct the young women in the city. This seemed to be an unwritten rule. Is this what it means to be benevolent and to treat all living things equally? Wei Chou couldn't help but sneer. He didn't hide the grief and indignation on his face. Lin Muyu led the group into the alley and rushed all the way. They didn't dare to provoke the Yihe nation's soldiers. If they killed one person, they would attract 10 or even 100 people. Then, there would be no need to talk about saving Qin Yin. Not far away, a pile of corpses was being burned. They were all commoners who had been slaughtered. The burnt smell permeated the entire Lanyan city. Judging from the light of the fire, more than 1/3 of the city had been burned and killed. Lanyan city was very large and could accommodate 5 million people. The Yihe nation's massacre would probably continue for a long time. When the group took a detour to the vicinity of Zetian Palace, they saw from a distance that Zetian Palace had been heavily surrounded by the Yihe nation's army. The dozen or so people under Lin Muyu's command were simply courting death. However, there were still many Yihe nation's cavalrymen coming and going in Zetian Palace. They seemed to be searching for something. Xiao Yin probably hasn't been found yet. Lin Muyu secretly rejoiced and said, "We don't need to enter Zetian Palace. We'll set up an ambush in this alley. We'll knock a few people unconscious and interrogate them." The group of people tied up their war horses and hid in an empty house. The commoners had been captured and killed, so there would be no one left. They waited until midnight. Finally, a group of cavalrymen galloped over. Under the starlight, they could see that the person at the front was wearing a black cloak and armor. He was actually a high-ranking general with 3 stars on his collar. He was a commander-level person. Lin Muyu's eyes turned cold and she said, "Do it." Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The golden gourd vines quickly rose and entangled all the people in the alley. Lin Muyu rushed down with her sword. With a wave of her long sword, she directly cut off the head of the commander at the front. It seemed that he was a civil general who did not know martial arts. The group of people following Lin Muyu were all imperial guards. Their cultivation levels were extremely high. They finished off the group of cavalrymen in 2 or 3 moves, leaving only one alive. This survivor looked at the corpse under Lin Muyu's sword and muttered, "It's over, it's over." "The commander is dead," Wei Chou said coldly. "A mere commander, what does he count as?" The bodyguard was aghast and said, He is the Yihe Kingdom's General Lin Yu." "Lin Yu?" Lin Muyu was stunned. "The Lin Yu who used the tactic of crossing the mountains with a green raincoat?" "Good death." Lin Muyu swept her gaze across and said, "Leave no survivors. Change into their clothes and continue to look for Her Highness Yin." The sky gradually brightened. The holy temple was full of commoners who were seeking refuge. They hoped that the guards of the holy temple could save them and escape the massacre of the city. But how could they escape? Boom! Under the fierce palm wind, the bodies of the two Iha kingdom cavalrymen were torn apart. The holy temple's grand deacon, Lei Hong, stood guard outside the holy temple. He looked towards the east and said, "It's daybreak." But at this moment, a powerful aura suddenly descended from the sky. He hurriedly looked up and a trace of despair flashed in his eyes. Luo Lan. Chapter 304. Luo Lan, who was wearing a golden robe, stood in the air. She looked at Lei Hong with disdain. Divine power surrounded her. She smiled faintly and said, "You are Lei Hong, one of the two sacred regions of Lanyan City?" Lei Hong raised a shining iron spear. His eyes were filled with reverence. He said, "Luo Lan, the sacred temple is the temple of the continent's cultivators. Since ancient times, it has not been blasphemed. No matter how many soldiers pass by, no one is allowed to start a massacre in the sacred temple. Iha country massacred the entire city, but definitely not in my sacred temple." "No, I don't kill." Luo Lan's lips curled up. She said indifferently, "I'm only here to meet you, one of the two sacred regions of the empire." Lei Hong glanced at the bustling citizens of Lanyan City in the sacred temple. He also saw Guiyang, Qin Yan, and the others looking at him. He shouted, "Close the doors of the sacred temple. No matter what happens, don't come out." Qin Yan gritted his teeth. "Grand Deacon," Lei Hong said decisively, "close the doors." Guiyang pushed with his palm. Immediately, the doors of the sacred temple closed. Through the gap of the doors, Lei Hong, dressed in a white robe, raised his iron spear high up. The power of the spirit returning art quickly spun. Good. Luo Lan praised twice and laughed. "This is the first time I've met such an opponent since I came to the lower realm." "Heh, but it's still not enough. I didn't expect that after Qin Yi ascended 200 years ago, the powerhouses in the lower realm would be so weak that a mere Saint Venerable can become the Saint Hall's Grand Deacon." As she spoke, Luo Lan suddenly thrust out with one hand. A blood-red blade came out of her body. First-class martial spirit, demon blood blade. In the next moment, the light of the demon blood blade fell down like a mountain. Bang! Dust rose. The spear in Lei Hong's hand was broken into two. A blood stain appeared on his shoulder. But he seemed to not feel the pain at all. He suddenly leaped and rushed towards Luo Lan. His left hand was behind his back. He quickly raised his right hand. The second-class martial spirit, Starlight Sword, came out of his body. The blade was surrounded by the golden divine power of the spirit returning art. It broke through the air. Good timing. Luo Lan chortled with glee as she gently swept an arm through the air, upon which a suit of battle armor quickly materialized. Bursts of divine power were injected into the suit of battle armor, and the suit of battle armor was able to forcibly repel Lei Hong's attack. However, Lei Hong's attacks were unending. The moment his martial spirit shattered, he raised his palm, and the soul-returning art transformed into a golden light that fell from the sky. It was like a golden bell that enveloped Luo Lan and the demon blood saber. With a one sound, the flames soared into the sky and burned fiercely. Luo Lan was dead? No, God would not be defeated so easily. In the next moment, with a chila sound, space distorted slightly, and a spatial crack suddenly appeared behind Lei Hong. Luo Lan's figure came out, and she said indifferently, "It ends here, Lei Hong, go to the afterlife." Buzz. The demon blood saber glowed brightly, forming a powerful divine realm domain that enveloped Reiham and Luo Lan. Arg. Lei Hong let loose a howl of anguish as blood flowed from the corners of his mouth. He abruptly fell to his knees, and he was completely unable to activate his Saint Realm domain. In the face of Luo Lan's power, he appeared to be extremely weak. Furthermore, the blood that was seeping out of the corners of his mouth transformed into beads of blood that flew toward the demon blood saber. The demon blood saber was a renowned, lethal weapon that devoured the blood essence of others in order to become more powerful. Golden red light swelled even further, and Luo Lan's expression was quite sinister as she chortled with glee. Accept your fate, the history of our empire is over. Lei Hong's body began to twist and contort, but he gritted his teeth and endured the immense pain without uttering a single sound. A series of bloody grooves appeared on his skin and face, and his energy and blood were being sucked dry by the demon blood saber. However, he was unwilling to give up his entire cultivation base to the demon blood saber. Rayhum roared into the sky. The underworld azure stone ring on his thumb buzzed out of the black tortoise shield. However, it instantly shattered under the pressure of the demonic blood saber. Rayham's muscles and chi and blood swelled up as he roared, "Take revenge for me!" Golden light exploded, and the entire plaza in front of the temple turned into a huge pit. Lei Hong's body had already disappeared. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. A dignified grand deacon of the temple had actually died without a complete corpse. Ding! The azure netherstone ring was very sturdy, and it actually fell into the rubble in the huge pit unscathed. Umph! Luo Lan snorted coldly, and suddenly slapped out with his palm. Amidst the rumbling sound, the metal doors of the temple turned into dust and fell down. He looked at Guiyang, Qin Yan, and the group of commoners in the temple, and said indifferently, "I, Luo Lan, have already become a god, and am not willing to harm the common people, so I won't kill you. However, you must tell me, there is still a holy region. Where is that Chu-Chu?" Qin Yan raised the fire serpent spear and walked forward step by step, the dragon scale armor covering his body. His eyes were filled with anger as he said, "Don't think that you can humiliate the lives of others just because you are a god. You want to kill Chu-Chu? Dream on." Luo Lan looked deeply at Qin Yan and said, "You are not worthy for me to make a move." Bullshit. Qin Yan roared angrily, raising his spear and rushing towards the sky. He landed diagonally, and the spear pierced downwards like lightning. However, Luo Lan did not do anything at all. The protective astral wall on the surface of his body forcefully sent Qin Yan flying. A stream of fresh blood spurted out in the air. Qin Yan's arms were already injured. Falling to the ground in a sorry state, Guiyang hurriedly helped Qin Yan up, his gaze hinting for him to stop attacking. And the group of instructors and sparring masters in the temple were nearly scared out of their wits. It could be seen how strong this god, in front of them, was. The strongest instructor of the temple could not even touch him, and he was already heavily injured. If it were someone else, they would probably have been smashed into pieces long ago. Guiyang looked at Luo Lan, shook his head, and said indifferently, "The massacre of the Iha kingdom. Everyone's whereabouts are unknown. As for where Chu-Chu is, we don't know either." Luo Lan snorted coldly, turned around, and flew out. Guiyang sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "Don't hesitate anymore. Escort the citizens out of the city. The more that can escape, the better. Lord Qin Yan, can you still move?" Qin Yan held onto his spear, wiped off the blood at the corner of his mouth, and said, "I'm fine. Let's go. I wonder how Big Brother and Big Brother Lin Muyu are doing." An instructor cupped his fists and said, "I heard that the Flying Mount camp was completely annihilated, and Lord Chu Huayin has already died for the country." Qin Yan was startled, and his eyes could not conceal the vexation and unwillingness, and said, "As soldiers of the Empire, we are hiding here. We can't be like Lord Chu Huayin. His blood has already dyed the yellow sand. This is simply a type of humiliation." Guiyang said, "To be able to escort these thousands of citizens out of the city is a merit of our temple. Quick, don't hesitate, get everyone out. Hiding in the temple will never escape this massacre." Yes. Under the ruins, Lin Muyu, Wei Chou, and the others were wearing the uniforms of the Iha Nation soldiers, and they slowly rode their horses under the southern city wall of Lanyan City. They did not dare to shout loudly, and could only search for Qin Yan's figure among the passing citizens. At the city gate, a group of Iha Nation soldiers armed with swords and sabers were guarding there, blocking the citizens' path of retreat. Any citizen who wanted to pass through this place had already been killed, and the corpses were piled up like a mountain. Some were burned on the spot, some were dragged further away to be buried, and even more were left exposed in the wilderness. After seeing Lin Muyu's military rank, a patrolling officer immediately cupped his fists respectfully and said, "May I know where Lord is going?" Lin Muyu glanced at him and said, "Remnant of the Empire, where is Qin Yin?" The patrolling officer smiled and said, "So Lord is also here for the 1 million Qin Yin coins? 1 million Qin Yin coins?" "Yes, Marshal Ji Yao offered a reward this morning. Anyone who captures Qin Yin will be rewarded with 1 million Qin Yin coins. However, it's not easy to capture Qin Yin. The Imperial Army is not completely wiped out yet, and it's said that Qin Lei has brought thousands of men to protect Qin Yin and leave the city through the broken wall. However, he can't have gone far, and General Lu Zhao has already led 20,000 cavalry to chase after him. Where are the Imperial Guards?" "The southern suburbs." "Got it. Move aside, we're going out of the city to chase after him." "All right, let them through." Outside the city, there were piles of corpses everywhere. This massacre had become a feast for the Iha nation of Lingnan. Lin Muyu traveled quickly in silence, while Wei Chou, Xiahou Sang, and the others had ashen faces and bloodshot eyes. As Imperial Guards, they could not protect the citizens of the Empire. Wasn't this a kind of mockery? "Command." Wei Chou's ears perked up, and after listening attentively he said, "There are sounds of fighting in the southeast." Lin Muyu's spirit pulse technique had also sensed many auras ripples, and she said, "Go quickly, we might be able to make it in time." The horses galloped through the blood-stained soil, and when Lin Muyu and the others rushed out of the forest, they saw a group of people fighting in the distance. However, the battle was nearing its end, and there were corpses of Imperial Guards and Iha soldiers everywhere. In the open space in the forest, there were hundreds of Iha nation archers holding bows and arrows, continuously shooting at the people in the inner circle. "All right." A mid-ranked officer raised his hand and said, "The Imperial Guards of the Qin Empire are all dead, so let's not waste time here. Let's go and chase after Qin Yin. We must eliminate her." After the hundreds of Iha soldiers left on their horses, Lin Muyu and the others rushed to the battlefield, only to discover that there were many corpses of Imperial Guards around them. At the center, there was a person kneeling there, his entire body pierced with arrows, and the white cloak embroidered with a golden-purple flower was already dyed red with blood. White-robed Imperial Guards, it was Qin Lei. Lin Muyu's heart felt as if it had been clawed into pieces. She flipped off her horse and staggered, almost losing her footing. She walked shakily to Qin Lei's side, wanting to hug him, but she realized that there wasn't even a place for her to put her hands on. Qin Lei was kneeling there, his entire body pierced with arrows, and his neck had also been pierced by 7 to 8 arrows, causing blood to flow. "Big brother Qin Lei." Lin Muyu's voice trembled, and she was almost unable to speak. Qin Lei did not die. He closed his eyes, and his tears mixed with blood flowed down. He cried and said, "Is it you, Lin Muyu? I can't protect her anymore, I can't protect her anymore." You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.